Hi guys. Tonight we are standing with you at the very edge of the American frontier. The sky already bruised purple and blue as the sun sinks fast behind an empty horizon. The wind is sharper than you expected. It cuts through your coat and presses against your skin like a warning. Somewhere far off, grass whispers and bends, and you realize there is nothing between you and the night, except what your hands can manage before darkness fully arrives. This is not the gentle cold of a winter walk. This is the kind of cold that tests plans, patience, and bodies. You probably will not survive this if you arrive unprepared or overconfident, and many people before you learned that lesson the hard way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me where you are listening from right now and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and stay with me as the story flows forward, step by step, into the cold. You are part of a pioneer family, arriving just as night begins to claim the plains. There is no village glow ahead, no friendly inn, no soft bed waiting. A mainstream historical fact is that thousands of families moving west in the 19th century were forced to stop wherever night caught them, especially during the first years of settlement, when towns were still little more than ideas. Tonight is one of those nights. You feel the pressure of time. The temperature is dropping faster than your hands can work, and every small decision suddenly matters. You look around instinctively, searching for shelter, but the land is wide and unforgiving. There are no trees nearby, just rolling grass and low ground that seems to swallow sound. Historians still argue whether pioneers underestimated the plains climate or simply had no real way to imagine it before experiencing it themselves. Standing here, with cold creeping into your boots, you understand how easy it would be to misjudge this place from a distance. The first night is often the hardest because you do not yet know what the cold will demand of you. You unload wagons with stiff fingers, breath puffing white in front of your face. Every object feels heavier than it did an hour ago. Wood cracks softly as it cools. Metal rings with a dull, unfriendly sound when set down. Even the air seems to press back when you inhale, dry and biting at your throat. A quirky tidbit from frontier life is that some pioneers believed the first night set the tone for the entire winter. If you slept poorly, they said, the season would punish you again and again. Whether superstition or psychological comfort, this belief pushed families to work past exhaustion, knowing rest would come only if shelter came first. You and your family move together without much talking. There is no energy for conversation. Children are guided gently but firmly, hands kept busy to stop them from standing still. Standing still is dangerous now. You feel it immediately when you pause, a deep chill settling into your legs. You learn fast that motion is warmth, and stillness invites the cold inside. As darkness thickens, the prairie begins to sound different. Wind moves lower, brushing grass like unseen fingers. Somewhere, an animal calls, distant and unconcerned with your struggle. You realize how small your fire looks once lit, just a trembling circle of orange against an ocean of black. A mainstream historical fact is that many pioneer families relied on open campfires their first nights before cabins could be built, despite the risks of wind and exposure. You crouch near the flames, hands outstretched, feeling relief as heat touches your skin, but even this comfort is fragile. Step back a few feet, and the warmth disappears instantly. The fire is not a solution, only a temporary truce with the cold. Scholars still debate whether early settlers burned fuel too quickly in moments like this out of fear rather than calculation, leaving them colder later in the night. Sleep feels impossible to imagine. The ground beneath you is hard, already losing the day's warmth. Blankets are laid out carefully, every layer precious. You test the soil with your hand and pull back quickly. It steals heat without mercy. You understand now why people spoke of the land as something that could either hold you or drain you, depending on how you treated it. Children begin to shiver despite movement and layers. You pull them closer, rubbing arms and backs, whispering reassurances you are not fully sure you believe yourself. The smell of smoke clings to clothes and hair, sharp and comforting at the same time. It will follow you into sleep and into memory, long after this night ends. There is a strange stillness that comes just before you finally settle down. The wind pauses, as if catching its breath. Stars appear with startling clarity, cold light scattered across the sky. You have never seen so many, and for a moment the beauty distracts you from fear. Historians still argue whether such moments of awe helped pioneers endure hardship by giving meaning to suffering, or whether they simply made loneliness sharper by contrast. You lie down at last, fully dressed, boots loosened but not removed. This, too, is a learned habit. Boots stay close, in case you must move quickly. The fire burns lower now, and you know someone will have to wake to feed it if you want it alive by morning. Sleep, when it comes, will be light and broken. As you close your eyes, the cold presses in again, testing every gap in clothing, every thin spot beneath you. This first night teaches you something essential. Survival here is not about comfort. It is about managing discomfort just well enough to last until dawn. And as the darkness deepens, you begin to understand that every night ahead will ask the same quiet question. Can you adapt? Or will the cold take more than you can spare? Morning never truly arrives with warmth. You wake stiff and slow, breath fogging the air inside your shelter, if it can even be called that. The fire has collapsed into ash and dull red embers, and the cold rushes back the moment you move. Your muscles protest as you sit up. This is the lesson the prairie teaches immediately. Night is not something you endure once. It repeats. And now you understand that tonight will be worse if you do not build something stronger before the sun disappears again. You step outside and the cold greets you like an old rival. The light reveals what darkness hid. Your camp is exposed on all sides. Wind slides freely across the land, unhindered by trees or hills. A mainstream historical fact is that many pioneer families rushed construction not for long-term comfort, but simply to block wind, which they quickly learned was more dangerous than low temperatures alone. You can feel it now, slipping through seams in your clothing, stealing heat faster than still air ever could. There is no time for perfection. Shelter must come first, even if it is crude. You gather what materials you have hauled across hundreds of miles. Logs, if you are lucky. Wagon boards, if you are not. Canvas, furniture, spare tools. Everything becomes potential wall or roof. Historians still argue whether pioneers overbuilt early shelters out of fear, or underbuilt them out of exhaustion and limited resources. Standing here, hands numb, the answer feels obvious. You build what your body can manage today. The work begins with rhythm. Lift, set, brace, repeat. Your breath settles into a steady pattern, and movement brings warmth back into your fingers. The sound of wood knocking against wood echoes sharply in the open air. Nails squeal as they are driven in. Each sound feels amplified by the emptiness around you. There is comfort in the noise. Silence would mean stopping, and stopping means cold. A quirky tidbit from frontier accounts is that some families deliberately built their first walls slightly crooked, believing straight lines angered bad luck. Whether superstition or coincidence, many early cabins did lean and twist, shaped as much by haste as belief. You do not care about straight lines today. You care about blocking wind. Children help where they can. They pass tools, hold boards, fetch small items. Keeping them moving keeps them warm and distracted. You notice how quickly they learn the rules of this place. Do not sit down. Do not remove layers. Stay close to the adults. Sleep will come later, after the sun gives its last weak warmth to the land. The ground becomes your enemy again as you work. Kneeling sends cold straight into your knees. You improvise, laying down blankets or spare sacks to insulate yourself from the soil. This is another lesson pioneers learned quickly. Earth pulls heat relentlessly. Scholars still debate how much ground insulation mattered compared to wall thickness, but your body tells you both matter more than theory ever could. As the structure takes shape, it looks fragile. Gaps remain between boards. The roof is thin and uneven. Snow will find its way through. Wind will still sneak inside, but already the space feels different. Stand inside, and the air moves slower. Your breath lingers. The cold does not vanish, but it hesitates. That hesitation is everything. You pack mud, grass, and scraps of cloth into the cracks. Fingers burn as cold clay presses against skin. The smell of damp earth rises, sharp and mineral. It reminds you strangely of safety. A mainstream historical fact is that pioneers often sealed cabins with whatever they had available, including moss, animal hair, and even newspaper, if it meant stopping drafts. The sun begins to slide downward again before you feel ready. There is always too much left undone. You step back to look at your work. It is not pretty. It would not impress anyone from back east, but it stands, and standing means a chance. As evening approaches, fatigue settles in, heavy and deep. Your shoulders ache, Your hands tremble slightly when you stop moving. This is the dangerous moment, when the body wants rest, but the day demands more. Historians still argue whether most frontier injuries happened during travel or during settlement, but many journals hint that exhaustion caused as much harm as accidents. You light the fire again, this time inside your new walls. Smoke curls upward, clinging briefly before finding its way out through gaps in the roof. The smell fills the space, thick and comforting. You sit close together, backs against rough boards, and feel how the shelter changes sound. Wind becomes a muffled presence instead of a constant roar. Night arrives quietly this time. The stars appear through cracks above, distant and cold, but less threatening now. You lie down on the hard floor, layered in clothing and blankets, listening to the fire crackle softly. It is still cold. Sleep will still be shallow. But as you close your eyes, you understand something important. Tonight, the cold has to work harder to reach you. You wake before dawn, not because you feel rested, but because the cold has found its way through the walls again. It slips in quietly, through every seam and thin board, settling against your skin until your body decides it has had enough of pretending to sleep. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb anyone else, and listen. The cabin creaks softly as the temperature shifts. Outside, the wind drags itself across the grass, lower now, as if prowling. Once the light grows strong enough to see by, you finally understand what your shelter truly is. The cabin stands, but it does not seal. The boards have shrunk overnight, leaving hairline gaps that glow pale blue with morning light. This was common. Surviving accounts make it clear that early log cabins were rarely airtight, especially during their first winter, when green wood dried and warped in the cold. You run your fingers along a seam and feel a thin ribbon of icy air slide over your skin. You spend the morning trying to tame those gaps. Mud is pressed in where it will stick. Scraps of cloth are hammered into stubborn corners. Moss, grass, even old paper is sacrificed to stop the wind. Each small improvement makes a difference you can feel immediately. The air inside moves less. Your breath lingers longer before fading. There is a quiet frustration in this work. You are not improving comfort. You are chasing tolerability. Many pioneers wrote that cabins did not feel warm so much as less cruel once sealed. The difference sounds small, but to your body it is enormous. Cold that pauses at the wall is far easier to live with than cold that flows freely across your skin. A small but telling custom shows up again and again in personal journals. Families often hung spare clothing along interior walls, not for storage, but to thicken them. Coats, dresses, blankets, anything heavy was pressed into service as insulation. You do the same, draping garments over nails and pegs. The cabin begins to smell of wool, leather, and smoke, a dense, familiar scent that signals safety more than cleanliness. By afternoon, the wind rises again, and you hear it test your work. It whistles softly through places you missed, but the sound is weaker now. The walls respond with dull knocks instead of sharp rattles. This change in sound matters more than you expected. It tells you where the cold is strongest, where tomorrow's effort should go. There is still no chimney, just a rough opening above the fire. Smoke hangs low when the wind dies, stinging your eyes and clinging to your throat. Yet most settlers accepted this trade. Breathing smoke was unpleasant, but breathing freezing air was worse. Some modern researchers remain divided over how harmful constant smoke exposure was compared to the benefits of retained heat. But in moments like this, theory feels distant. Night approaches again, steady and inevitable. You prepare differently now. Extra layers are placed beneath bedding. Tools are arranged closer to reach. Water is moved nearer to the fire so it will not freeze solid before morning. These are small habits, learned quickly, and passed quietly between families on the frontier. As darkness settles, you notice something new. The cold still enters, but it does not dominate the space. It pools near the floor, stays close to the walls, leaves the center of the room marginally gentler. You sit with your back against rough logs and feel how they steal heat slowly instead of all at once. Sleep comes easier, though still light. The fire crackles softly, contained and watchful. The wind sounds tired, less aggressive than the night before. You drift in and out, aware of your surroundings but no longer alarmed by them. This cabin is imperfect. It leaks, it smokes, it creaks. Yet tonight, it holds just enough warmth to let you rest, and that is a victory you feel deep in your bones. You wake with the strange sense that the cold is coming from below rather than around you. The air inside the cabin feels almost manageable, but the floor seems to draw warmth straight out of your body. When you place a hand down, the chill seeps in immediately, deep and persistent. This is when you begin to understand something pioneers learned early and never forgot. The ground itself is one of winter's most powerful tools. Settlers quickly noticed that sleeping closer to the earth could either save heat or steal it, depending on how it was handled. Many early families learned through trial and error that bare soil acted like a sponge for warmth. It absorbed body heat all night long without ever giving it back. Once this became clear, people began experimenting with ways to turn the earth from an enemy into a shield. You spend part of the morning digging, even though your muscles still ache from the previous days. A shallow pit is carved into the cabin floor, just enough to change the airflow. Earth is piled along the outer walls, thickening them from the outside. This practice shows up repeatedly in frontier settlements, especially in areas with brutal winters. It was widely understood that soil, when packed tightly, slowed the movement of cold air better than wood alone. As you work, the smell of fresh earth rises around you, damp and heavy. It carries a sense of permanence that the flimsy boards never did. The cabin looks smaller now, partially swallowed by the land, but it feels sturdier, more rooted. Some families even joked that they slept inside the prairie rather than on top of it. An unexpected workaround some settlers relied on involved raising sleeping platforms slightly above the floor. A few inches of air beneath a bed could reduce heat loss significantly. You follow this idea, stacking boards and crates to lift your bedding off the ground. It feels awkward at first, but the difference becomes clear as soon as you lie down. There has long been disagreement among historians about how widespread these earth-based techniques were, since they often left little trace once cabins collapsed or were abandoned. Still, enough written accounts mention earth banking and dug-in floors to suggest it was more than a rare improvisation. It was a response shaped by necessity. As evening approaches, the cabin seems quieter. The earth piled against the walls muffles sound. Wind still passes over the prairie, but it no longer feels like it is trying to peel your shelter apart. Inside, the air holds steady, and the fire seems to burn more slowly, as if less heat is escaping. You prepare for sleep with more confidence now. Bedding is arranged on the raised platform. Extra layers are placed beneath as well as above. Children are guided into the warmest spots without discussion. Everyone knows where the heat will last longest. When you lie down, the difference is unmistakable. The cold does not bite immediately. It waits. Your body relaxes in response, muscles loosening just a little more than before. Outside, the earth you move during the day settles with faint pops and sighs, as if the land itself is adjusting to your presence. Sleep comes deeper than it has so far, not because the night is warm, but because it is predictable. The cold has been slowed, redirected, managed. As you drift off, you realize that surviving winter here is not about conquering nature. It is about learning how to hide within it. By the time evening settles in, fire has become more than a tool. It is the center of your world. You notice how every movement in the cabin bends toward it, how bodies angle closer without thinking, how conversations, when they happen at all, circle quietly around its glow. Once the sun disappears, nothing else offers the same promise of relief. You spend part of the afternoon gathering fuel with a new seriousness. Early settlers quickly learned that firewood was not just a daytime concern. Without enough fuel stacked and ready, the night could turn dangerous long before morning. Many surviving letters describe evenings spent counting logs, estimating hours of heat the way one might measure time itself. The fire you build is careful and low, not the roaring blaze you might imagine. A tall flame wastes fuel and sends warmth upward instead of outward. Families learned to keep fires compact, feeding them slowly so heat would last through the longest stretch of darkness. This approach shows up repeatedly in frontier accounts, especially during deep winter, when every piece of fuel mattered. A curious practice, rarely mentioned in textbooks, involved banking coals rather than letting a fire die completely. Before sleep, hot embers were raked together and covered lightly with ash. This kept them alive until morning, making it possible to revive the fire without starting from nothing in the cold. You do this now, hands moving carefully, aware that one mistake could scatter sparks onto the floor. There is still debate among historians about how often cabins actually burned down compared to how often people feared they would. Fire was essential, yet always threatening. You keep a bucket of water close, even though you know it may freeze by morning. The presence of it brings some comfort, even if its usefulness is uncertain. As night deepens, the fire changes character. The sharp crackle of fresh wood softens into a steady murmur. Shadows stretch and shift along the walls, blurring the edges of the space. Smoke drifts lazily upward, and you feel it sting your eyes before settling into the wood and cloth around you. That smell becomes part of everything, a constant reminder that warmth here comes at a cost. You sit close enough to feel heat on your face while your back remains cool. This uneven warmth is familiar now. You learn to rotate slowly, letting each side of your body take its turn. Children are guided through the same ritual, taught without explanation how to lean in and pull back. Some settlers believed that a quietly burning fire calmed fear as much as it warmed the body. Staring into the embers gave the mind something steady to hold on to, while the wind pressed against the walls outside. Whether psychological comfort or simple distraction, the effect is real. Your breathing slows, your thoughts stretch out, less sharp than they were before. When it is finally time to lie down, the fire is left small but alive. Its glow paints the cabin in deep orange and soft brown. You settle onto your bedding, eyes heavy, ears tuned to the gentle sound of embers shifting. Outside, the cold continues its patient work. Inside, the fire holds the line, just long enough for sleep to take you. You learn very quickly that fire is only as reliable as the fuel that feeds it. By the next morning, your carefully stacked woodpile already looks smaller than it should. Each log you carried yesterday now represents hours of survival rather than simple labor. When you step outside, the truth of the plains becomes impossible to ignore. There are no trees nearby. The horizon remains bare in every direction, a wide open sweep of grass and frozen earth that offers beauty but very little comfort. This is where many pioneer families faced their first real shock. Letters and diaries make it clear that newcomers often assumed wood would be easier to find than it was. On the open plains, timber could be miles away, and hauling it consumed precious energy. You stand there now, scanning the land, realizing that tonight's warmth depends on what you can gather today. The wind presses against you as you walk farther from the cabin. Grass crunches under your boots, stiff with frost. You bend to pick up broken stalks and dried brush, bundling them under your arm. It feels inadequate, almost foolish, but you take everything that might burn. Even small scraps matter when the night stretches long. One thing that frontier records consistently show is that families became remarkably inventive when wood was scarce. You begin to understand why. As you search the ground, you notice dried animal droppings scattered across the prairie. They are light, flat, and plentiful. This was not an accident of history. Many settlers burned them deliberately once wood ran out, especially in regions where trees simply did not grow. It feels strange at first. The idea of using this as fuel clashes with every habit you brought from back east. Yet practicality wins quickly here. You collect them carefully, stacking them away from moisture. When dried thoroughly, they burn slowly and evenly, producing steady heat. An odd detail that appears in multiple pioneer journals is that children were often tasked with collecting these fuel pieces, turning an unpleasant chore into an ordinary part of daily routine. By afternoon, you test them in the fire. The smell is different, sharp and earthy, but not unbearable. Smoke rises thicker than before, yet the heat lasts. You sit back and watch the embers glow, feeling a strange gratitude for something you never imagined relying on. The prairie provides in its own way, if you learn how to read it. There has never been complete agreement among historians about how widespread this practice truly was, since many families avoided mentioning it out of embarrassment. Still, enough first-hand accounts survive to suggest it was common enough to sustain entire communities through winters when wood was scarce. Standing here, feeling warmth spread through your hands, you understand why pride mattered less than survival. Fuel gathering reshapes your day. You plan meals around it. You rest only after it is done. Even conversations drift toward it. How much remains? How long it might last? Who will gather more tomorrow? The fire becomes a quiet clock, measuring hours not by light, but by heat. As evening approaches, the cabin fills with a heavier smell than before. It clings to clothes and hair, mixing with smoke and damp earth. This scent will follow you for weeks. It will mark you as someone who has learned to live differently. Some settlers later wrote that they could recognize fellow plains families by smell alone, long before seeing their cabins. You arrange the fuel carefully beside the hearth. Wood burns first. The slower fuel comes later, once the fire is well established. This sequence matters. A poorly managed fire wastes heat and creates too much smoke. Through trial and error, families learned patterns that worked. passing them along quietly without explanation. Night arrives again, steady and calm. The wind picks up briefly, testing the walls, then settles. Inside, the fire holds strong, fed by your day's effort. Children sit closer than usual, eyes reflecting orange light. They wrinkle their noses at the unfamiliar smell, then accept it without complaint. Adaptation happens faster in the young. As the hours pass, you notice something else. The fire seems to last longer tonight. The heat does not spike and vanish. It stretches, steady and patient. You rotate fuel carefully, adding small amounts rather than large pieces. This approach appears repeatedly in pioneer descriptions of winter life. Waste meant cold, control meant rest. The question of whether such fuels were healthier or more dangerous than wood remains unresolved among modern researchers. Smoke inhalation was certainly a problem, yet freezing was an immediate threat. In moments like this, theory loses its urgency. What matters is that the cabin stays warm enough to sleep. When you finally lie down, the fire is still alive, glowing softly. You pull blankets higher, feeling warmth linger in the air longer than before. Outside, the prairie remains vast and indifferent. Inside, the simple act of burning what the land provides creates a fragile island of comfort. Sleep comes slower than some nights, but deeper than others. The smell, the heat, the steady crackle combine into something almost soothing. You drift in and out, aware that tomorrow will demand the same effort again. Fuel must be gathered. Fire must be fed. The cold never stops asking for payment. Yet, as your breathing slows, you recognize a quiet shift. You are no longer reacting blindly to the environment. You are learning its rules. And each night you survive adds one more lesson, etched not in books, but in muscle memory and habit. You wake to a different kind of quiet, the sort that only comes after a night where the fire behaved exactly as planned. The cabin is still cold, but it is not hostile. The air feels thick rather than sharp, as if the warmth from last night is lingering out of habit. You sit up slowly, careful not to wake anyone else, and listen. No wind claws at the walls, no boards groan in protest. For the first time, morning feels manageable. As daylight grows, you step outside and are greeted by a sky washed, pale and distant. Frost coats the grass in every direction, turning the prairie into a field of brittle glass. The beauty is undeniable, but it offers no warmth. You pull your coat tighter and scan the ground again, already thinking about fuel. The lesson has settled deep now. Nights are won during the day. Fuel gathering becomes more systematic. You no longer wander aimlessly, hoping for luck. You follow patterns. Low spots where debris collects after storms, areas where animals tend to gather, places where dried material lies protected from moisture. This shift from guessing to knowing marks a turning point. Frontier families often wrote that survival improved once routines replaced improvisation. There is an odd intimacy to this work. You bend close to the land, reading small signs most people would ignore. A cluster of dried stalks half buried by snow, a patch of ground darker than the rest. You learn where the prairie hides its offerings. One lesser-known habit appears quietly in several personal accounts. Some settlers memorized fuel routes the way sailors memorized currents, passing that knowledge to children as casually as directions to water. By midday, your arms ache from carrying bundles back to the cabin. You stack them carefully, separating faster-burning material from slower fuel. This sorting matters. Quick heat is useful in the early evening. Long-lasting embers matter most after midnight. These distinctions are rarely mentioned in formal histories, but they appear repeatedly in letters written home, where details of daily survival mattered more than grand events. Inside, the cabin reflects your growing experience. Everything has a place now. Fuel is arranged within reach. Tools are stored where stiff fingers can find them in the dark. Even the fire pit looks different, ringed with stones adjusted through trial and error to hold heat longer. The space feels less like a temporary refuge and more like a living system. As evening approaches, the sky takes on that familiar hard clarity. You feel the temperature drop before it shows on the ground. This awareness comes without thought now. Your body recognizes the shift instinctively. You prepare the fire earlier than before, letting it establish a deep bed of coals before night fully arrives. A curious practice shows up again and again in prairie settlements. Families often saved their best fuel for the coldest part of the night, even if it meant enduring discomfort earlier. This patience required discipline. It meant trusting that restraint now would mean rest later. You follow the same logic, feeding the fire sparingly while the light remains. When darkness settles, it does so gently. The cabin holds steady. The walls block most of the wind. The earth piled around them keeps the cold from surging inward. Inside, the fire hums rather than roars. Its glow is lower, steadier, more controlled. You sit near it, turning occasionally, feeling warmth move across your body in slow waves. There is talk now, quiet and unhurried. Not much is said, but small comments drift through the room. Observations about the weather, thoughts about tomorrow's work, memories of places left behind. These moments appear often in frontier diaries, described not as happiness, but as relief. Relief that the night is not actively fighting you. Some researchers continue to disagree on whether prairie winters were psychologically harder than physically harsher environments like mountains. What seems clear from personal accounts is that the monotony of cold played its own role. Night after night of vigilance wore people down. You feel that weariness now, a deep tiredness that sleep alone does not cure. As the hours pass, you notice how the cabin sounds change. The fire settles into a low rhythm. The walls contract slightly as temperatures drop. Outside, the prairie grows still, as if holding its breath. These sounds become markers of time. You no longer need a clock to know how late it is. Children drift off first, breathing slow and even. Their faces relax in the firelight, tension fading for a few hours. You adjust blankets quietly, careful not to wake them. Adults follow later, sleep arriving in stages rather than all at once. Someone remains half awake, tending the fire when needed, listening for changes. At some point, you lie down yourself. The raised bedding keeps the worst of the cold away. The air feels warmer than it did weeks ago, though the temperature is likely the same. Adaptation has altered perception as much as reality. You pull blankets higher and close your eyes. Sleep comes in waves. You drift, wake, drift again. Each time you surface, the cabin remains steady. The fire still lives. The cold has not breached the walls. This consistency is new, and it calms you more than warmth alone ever could. As the night deepens, you realize something important. You are no longer reacting to winter with fear. You are managing it with routine. Fuel gathered at the right time. Fire tended with restraint. Shelter maintained with patience. These small choices, repeated daily, build a kind of quiet confidence. Outside, the prairie remains vast and indifferent. Inside, your cabin glows faintly, a small, stubborn point of warmth against the dark. You breathe slowly, letting sleep take you again, knowing that while the cold has not been defeated, it has been negotiated with, and for now, that is enough. By now, sleep no longer begins with undressing. It begins with preparation. You understand that the clothes you wear through the night are as important as the shelter around you. The moment the fire drops low, fabric becomes your final defense, and every layer has a role to play. You start with what stays closest to your skin. Shirts and undergarments are chosen not for comfort, but for how well they trap warmth without holding moisture. Early settlers learned quickly that damp fabric pulled heat away faster than cold air ever could. Diaries from the frontier frequently mention the misery of waking in wet clothing after sweating too close to the fire. Balance mattered. Too many layers meant moisture. Too few meant shivering. Over time, families developed their own systems. Wool stayed against the body because it continued to insulate even when slightly damp. Cotton was used sparingly. Linen was avoided at night whenever possible. These preferences appear again and again in personal letters, passed along like quiet advice rather than formal instruction. You dress deliberately now, even though it feels strange to prepare for sleep like this. Shirts are tucked in tightly, gaps at the wrists and ankles are covered. Socks are doubled, one pair worn loose over another to trap air between them. Air, you have learned, is often warmer than fabric itself. A lesser-known habit that shows up in winter journals involves loosening boots rather than removing them entirely. Leather stiffened quickly in freezing temperatures, and boots left too far from the fire could become impossible to put on by morning. You keep yours near your bedding, soles facing the embers, laces slack. They are not comfortable, but they are ready. As the evening settles, you notice how bodies move differently now. No one rushes to shed layers. Movements are slower, more economical. Heat is something you conserve as carefully as food or fuel. This mindset marks a clear shift from earlier weeks, when discomfort was treated as temporary rather than constant. There remains disagreement among historians about how often pioneers slept fully dressed versus partially layered. Accounts vary widely, shaped by region, resources, and individual tolerance. What remains consistent is that people adjusted quickly, abandoning habits from warmer places without much regret. Necessity has a way of erasing attachment. You lie down with your clothing arranged carefully. Outer garments are loosened to allow circulation. Blankets are pulled up high, but not tight enough to trap sweat. Hats remain on, covering ears and forehead. Many settlers noted that covering the head made a noticeable difference in how warm they felt through the night. You notice it too, heat lingering longer around your face. The fire burns low now, carefully managed to last. Its glow barely reaches the edges of the room. Shadows cling to corners. The cabin smells of smoke, earth, and wool, a dense blend that feels oddly comforting. This scent becomes associated with safety, with nights that end in mourning rather than disaster. Sleep comes gradually. You drift, wake briefly, adjust a sleeve or blanket, then drift again. Each movement is practiced, almost automatic. You no longer fight the cold with frustration, you accommodate it. At some point in the night, the temperature drops sharply. You feel it immediately, a tightening in your chest, a deeper chill pressing at your legs. Without fully waking, you pull layers closer, tuck fabric around ankles, shift your position to conserve heat. These actions happen without thought, guided by experience rather than panic. Some modern researchers suggest that pioneer sleep was lighter and more fragmented than ours, shaped by constant environmental awareness. This seems accurate now. You do not sink into deep unconsciousness. Instead, you hover just above it, resting while remaining alert enough to respond. Children stir occasionally, drawn closer by instinct. You adjust their blankets, feel their small bodies radiate warmth back into the shared space. Shared heat remains one of the most reliable resources you have, and families instinctively clustered to make use of it. By early morning, your clothing feels heavy, warmed by hours of body heat. When you finally sit up, there is resistance in every movement, as if the cold is reluctant to release you. Yet you are not frozen, not numb. You survived another night without burning too much fuel, without waking in pain. As light begins to seep through the cracks in the walls, you stretch slowly, listening to the cabin wake with you. The fire still glows faintly. Boots are stiff but wearable. Fingers ache, but they move. These small victories matter. You step outside briefly and feel the shock of fresh cold against your face. It is sharper than anything inside. You return quickly, grateful for layers, for walls, for lessons learned. Each night has taught you something, and this one has taught you how to turn clothing into shelter. As the day begins, you hang damp garments near the fire to dry, careful not to scorch them. This daily ritual becomes as important as fuel gathering. Dry clothes mean warmer nights. Warm nights mean clearer thinking. You realize now that survival here depends on systems, not strength. Layering is one of those systems, simple yet powerful. It works quietly, hour after hour, while you sleep. When evening comes again, you will repeat the process without hesitation. Choose layers, manage heat, prepare for the long dark. And as you lie down once more, fully dressed and deeply tired, you will do so with the calm knowledge that tonight, at least, you know what to wear to face the cold. You begin to understand that warmth does not belong to individuals out here. It belongs to groups. The cold teaches this lesson quietly but firmly, night after night. When the fire fades and the walls surrender their stored heat, bodies become the most dependable source of comfort you have left. At first, the idea feels awkward. You were raised with space, with personal boundaries that felt natural and polite. Here, those habits lose their meaning quickly. As night settles in, everyone drifts closer together without discussion. Bedding is arranged side by side. Blankets overlap, limbs brush and remain there. No one apologizes. There is nothing to explain. Personal accounts from frontier families repeatedly note how sleeping arrangements changed during winter. Separate beds became rare luxuries. Entire households often slept in a single cluster, not out of affection alone, but out of necessity. Heat shared was heat saved. You feel that logic now, pressed shoulder to shoulder, breath mingling in the dim light. The first minutes are uncomfortable. Someone shifts, someone sighs. A child's cold feet find your leg and stay there. Slowly, though, something changes. The space beneath the blankets warms. The air between bodies thickens and softens. Heat that would have escaped into the cabin instead circulates among you, steady and quiet. There is an old belief recorded in several settler letters that sleeping alone during winter invited sickness. Whether this was true in a medical sense remains uncertain, but the perception shaped behavior. People believed warmth preserved health, and closeness preserved warmth. You do not question it tonight. You feel better already. The sounds of shared sleep are different from solitude. Breathing overlaps. Movements ripple instead of jolt. When one person stirs, others adjust instinctively, maintaining the fragile balance of warmth. You become aware of how the group moves as a single unit, responding to cold with collective instinct rather than individual reaction. Some historians point out that this closeness altered family dynamics in subtle ways. Privacy disappeared for months at a time. Arguments softened or intensified under constant proximity. What is clear is that winter nights forced intimacy, whether people welcomed it or not. Lying here, surrounded by others, you sense both comfort and tension, held together by necessity. Children sleep deeper in this arrangement. Their breathing slows, faces flushed with warmth. They curl inward naturally, seeking the center of heat. Adults remain more alert, waking occasionally to adjust blankets or reposition a limb that has gone cold. Responsibility lingers even in rest. An overlooked detail in many pioneer narratives involves the use of shared coverings rather than individual ones. Large quilts or patched blankets were favored over smaller pieces because they reduced gaps where cold could slip through. You pull one such covering higher now, feeling its weight settle evenly across the group. As the hours pass, the fire drops lower, but the space beneath the blankets holds steady. You feel warmth radiating not just from the fire's memory, but from the bodies around you. This warmth is different. It is softer, less sharp. It seeps rather than burns. At some point, the wind rises outside. You hear it test the walls again, searching for weaknesses. Inside, the response is instinctive. People draw closer without waking fully. A shoulder presses against yours. A blanket edge is tucked tighter. The group tightens like a knot. Modern researchers sometimes debate whether such sleeping arrangements increase the spread of illness. That question remains open. What is certain is that isolation carried its own risks. Cold weakened bodies quickly. Heat preserved strength. In moments like this, survival strategies favored immediate protection over distant possibilities. Your sleep remains light, but it is not restless. You drift in and out, always aware of warmth around you. When you wake briefly, you recognize familiar breathing patterns, the subtle rise and fall of chests beside you. These sounds anchor you, reminding you that you are not facing the night alone. There is also a psychological shift that comes with shared warmth. Fear loses some of its edge. The darkness beyond the walls feels farther away. Even the cold seems less personal, less targeted. It presses in, but it does not isolate. Toward the deepest part of the night, when the fire is little more than memory, you feel the true value of this arrangement. The cabin is cold. The walls are cold. The air outside is merciless. Yet within this small cluster of bodies, warmth persists. It is not abundant, but it is enough. You adjust slightly, careful not to disturb anyone. The movement sends a ripple through the group, then settles again. Blankets shift, then still. The system holds. As dawn approaches, light begins to creep through cracks in the walls. The cold sharpens again, signaling morning. People stir one by one, reluctant to break the warmth that has carried them through the night. Limbs disentangle slowly. Blankets are lifted with regret. When you finally sit up, the difference is immediate. Cold rushes in where warmth once lingered. You pull your coat tighter, feeling how quickly heat escapes when shared space dissolves. Yet there is satisfaction too. The night did not take what it wanted. You kept enough warmth to last until morning. You look around at the others as they wake, hair tangled, faces tired but intact. This closeness, imposed by winter, has done its work again. You rise stiffly, muscles protesting, but alive and capable. Shared sleep becomes routine after this. It is no longer discussed or questioned. It is simply how nights are handled when the cold grows serious. Alone, the night is too large. Together, it becomes manageable. As you move toward the fire to coax it back to life, you carry that lesson with you. Warmth here is communal. Survival, too, is something you do together, breath by breath, night by night. Morning arrives slowly, carried in on pale light and stiff movements. Children wake first, not because they are rested, but because cold reaches them faster. Smaller bodies lose heat quickly, and even with shared warmth through the night, They stir early, blinking and quiet, unsure whether to move or stay still. You notice this pattern now. Winter nights end for the young, long before they end for adults. Caring for children in this cold becomes a constant calculation. They need warmth, but they also need movement. Too much stillness invites chill. Too much activity brings sweat that later freezes. Families learn this balance through repetition rather than instruction. You guide them gently, urging small motions, rubbing arms and hands, keeping blood moving without exhausting them. Many pioneer diaries speak plainly about fear for children during winter. Illness took hold faster in the cold, and recovery was uncertain. Parents adjusted nighttime routines accordingly. Children were placed in the warmest parts of the sleeping cluster, often between adults, where heat was most stable. You do the same, guiding them back into shared warmth when they wake too early. There is a quiet tenderness in these moments. You pull blankets higher, feel small hands grasp at fabric, hear sleepy murmurs that barely form words. Outside, the cold waits patiently. Inside, warmth is defended inch by inch. As the fire is coaxed back to life, children gather near it, careful but eager. They stretch fingers toward the growing heat, faces relaxing as warmth returns. You watch closely. Burns were a real danger in cabins like this. Parents often warn children more about fire than cold, because fire punished mistakes instantly. Cold worked slowly. Breakfast is simple and warm if possible. Hot food mattered in the morning, especially for the young. Even a thin broth or warmed bread made a difference. Frontier accounts frequently mention the comfort children took in warm meals. Even when portions were small, you notice it too. Shoulders drop, movements soften, complaints fade. During the day, children are kept busy, not for productivity, but for warmth. Small tasks keep them moving without overexertion, carrying light fuel, sorting cloth, holding tools. Standing idle is discouraged gently but firmly. You learn that boredom is less dangerous than cold, but not by much. There are stories, passed quietly among settlers, about children who fell asleep too deeply near fires and did not wake. Whether exaggerated or not, these stories shaped behavior. Nighttime vigilance around children remained high. Adults slept lightly, waking often to check breathing, to adjust blankets, to feel foreheads for heat or chill. As evening returns, routines tighten. Children are fed first. Layers are added earlier. Their clothing is checked carefully for dampness. Wet fabric is changed without argument. Tears may come, but they are brief. Children here learn quickly that comfort is temporary. Warmth must be protected. Some scholars continue to debate how winter hardship shaped frontier childhood psychologically. What remains clear from personal writings is that children adapted faster than adults expected. They accepted shared sleep, limited privacy, and strict routines with little protest. You see it in how they settle under blankets now, bodies curling inward, trusting the warmth around them. Night falls again, steady and cold. Children are placed carefully within the sleeping cluster. Hats are pulled low, socks are adjusted, small feet are tucked against warmer bodies. You listen as their breathing slows, faster at first, then evening out. Sleep takes them quickly once warmth stabilizes. Adults remain awake longer, watching the fire, listening to the wind. Responsibility lingers. Even rest feels conditional. You shift positions occasionally to ensure children remain covered, pulling blankets back into place when small movements disturb them. At some point, a child whimpers softly, half dreaming. You murmur reassurance without fully waking them. This happens often. Cold nights sharpen dreams. The mind stays alert even as the body rests. Gentle words are enough. Warmth returns. Breathing steadies. There is an unspoken understanding now. Children come first in winter. Resources bend toward them. Heat, food, space. This priority shows up again and again in frontier letters. Sometimes with quiet pride, sometimes with exhaustion. You feel both. Toward the coldest part of the night, you wake fully for a moment. The fire is low. The cabin is quiet. You listen to the rhythm of breathing around you, counting without meaning to. All present, all alive. This accounting becomes habit. Morning is not assumed. It is confirmed. When dawn finally comes, children wake slowly this time, warmth lingering from the group. They stretch, rub eyes, sit up carefully. Smiles appear, small but real. Another night passed, another lesson learned. You help them dress, guiding stiff limbs into layers. Laughter breaks out briefly over tangled sleeves and mismatched socks. Even here, even now, childhood finds room to exist. As the day begins, you step outside briefly, cold, biting, fresh against your face. Inside, the cabin holds warmth and movement and quiet resilience. You return quickly, grateful. Caring for children in this place teaches you something fundamental. Survival is not only about enduring cold, it is about protecting vulnerability without weakening yourself. It is about planning nights around the smallest bodies, the lightest breaths. When evening comes again, you will repeat these steps without hesitation. Feed them first, warm them early, place them carefully among you, listen through the night, and as sleep takes you once more, you will do so knowing that in the coldest seasons, care itself becomes a form of shelter. By the time winter settles fully into its rhythm, blankets are no longer just bedding. They become archives. Each quilt, each worn layer, carries the memory of hands that made it, of time spent stitching by lamplight long before the cold arrived. When you pull them close at night, you are not only trapping warmth, you are wrapping yourself in labor, patience, and familiarity. You notice how carefully these layers are handled. Quilts are never tossed aside carelessly. They are folded with intention during the day and aired briefly when weather allows, then stacked again with care. Families treated them as vital equipment rather than decoration. Many frontier households owned very few manufactured goods, but they invested heavily in handmade coverings, knowing they would be used every night for months at a time. Records from the period show that quilts often followed families across generations, patched and repaired as needed. A square here, a seam there. Nothing was wasted. You can see the story in the fabric when you look closely. Faded colors, uneven stitches, sections cut from old clothing, repurposed into something warmer and more lasting. As evening approaches, quilts are arranged strategically. Thicker ones go beneath to insulate against the cold rising from the floor. Lighter ones go on top to trap air, without crushing it out. This layering system did not come from books or instruction. It emerged through trial, error, and observation. Night after night taught what worked. An interesting pattern appears in personal letters from settlers. People wrote more about their quilts than their furniture. Beds broke, chairs splintered, tables warped, but quilts endured, repaired repeatedly, adjusted to changing needs. You understand why now. When the fire fades and bodies cool, these layers become the final barrier between sleep and suffering. You lie down and pull a familiar quilt up to your chin. The weight is reassuring. Not heavy enough to restrict movement, but substantial enough to signal rest. The fabric smells faintly of smoke and soap and something softer beneath, a scent you associate with safety. It calms your breathing without effort. Children respond to these layers almost immediately. Small hands grip corners, faces relax. You watch as tension leaves their bodies once the quilt settles. This reaction shows up often in accounts of winter life. Warm coverings brought comfort that went beyond physical heat. They marked the transition from activity to rest, from exposure to shelter. Some historians have suggested that quilts served an emotional function as much as a practical one. They were reminders of home in a landscape that often felt temporary and unforgiving. Lying here now, you feel that truth in a quiet way. The quilt grounds you, even as wind presses against the walls. During the night, you adjust layers carefully. Too many coverings trap moisture. Too few invite chill. You learn to feel the difference with your skin. A slight dampness means loosening something. A creeping cold means pulling another edge closer. These adjustments become subtle and precise, barely disturbing sleep. There is a moment, sometime past midnight, when the cabin grows quiet enough that every small sound carries. The fire settles. The wind softens. Fabric shifts gently as someone turns. Quilts respond with a low rustle, almost like breathing. This sound becomes part of the night's rhythm. In the deepest cold, quilts are sometimes wrapped around shoulders even while sitting near the fire. This habit appears repeatedly in frontier descriptions. People conserved warmth whenever possible, not just during sleep. You do the same now, draping a spare layer around your back as you tend the embers. The question of how effective quilts truly were compared to modern insulation remains debated among researchers. What is not in doubt is that they made winter survivable for countless families. Without them, even the best-built cabins would have lost heat too quickly. Fabric filled the gaps that wood and earth could not. As the hours pass, you drift between sleep and awareness. When you wake briefly, the quilt is always there, still holding warmth, still doing its quiet work. It does not solve the cold entirely. It slows it. That slowing is enough. Toward morning, when the fire is nearly gone, quilts matter most. You feel cold pressing from the walls, but beneath the layers, your core remains warm. Fingers stay flexible. Breathing stays steady. You pull the quilt higher once more and let sleep take you again. At dawn, light slips through cracks and lands across the fabric, revealing its patterns. You sit up slowly, careful not to shake out warmth too quickly. Quilts are folded back only when necessary. Cold rushes in immediately, reminding you how much these layers have been holding back. During the day, quilts are checked for damage, seams are reinforced, small tears are stitched closed. This maintenance happens constantly, woven into daily tasks. It is not a special project, it is survival work. As evening returns, the quilts are laid out again, familiar and dependable. You recognize which ones belong where, which are best suited for children, which hold heat longest, which are lighter for milder nights. This knowledge becomes intuitive. When you lie down once more, you do so with a sense of trust. These layers have carried you through many nights already. They will carry you through another. Outside, winter remains vast and unyielding. Inside, fabric stitched by patient hands continues its quiet resistance. You close your eyes, feeling the quilt settle, feeling warmth gather beneath it. Sleep comes gently, guided by familiarity. In a world that changes daily, this constancy matters more than you ever expected. The nights develop their own language, and you learn it slowly, without realizing when the lessons begin. Sound becomes one of the most important signals. In daylight, the prairie feels open and readable. At night, when sight fades, sound takes over, and you begin to measure safety by what you hear and what you do not. As darkness settles, the cabin responds to the drop in temperature with soft complaints. Wood contracts, nails tighten, boards shift against one another with low clicks and sighs. At first, these noises startled you awake. Now they serve as reassurance. The cabin is adjusting, not failing. It is alive in its own quiet way. The wind carries the most information. When it slides gently along the walls, you know the night will be steady. When it rises and falls in uneven bursts, you prepare for a colder stretch ahead. Settlers often wrote that they could predict the severity of a night by listening to how the wind approached rather than how strong it sounded. You understand this now. A low, constant push feels different from sharp, probing gusts. Inside, the fire adds its own voice. Fresh wood snaps sharply. Settled embers murmur and shift. When the fire begins to sound hollow, you know fuel is running low. These sounds guide you even in half sleep. You wake just enough to add a small piece, then settle back down without fully opening your eyes. An overlooked detail in frontier life is how people learn to sleep through certain noises while remaining alert to others. The howl of wind became background. The creak of walls became familiar. What woke you instantly was silence. When wind dropped suddenly or the fire stopped speaking, your eyes opened without thought. Silence meant change, and change demanded attention. Children learned this language too. Even in sleep, they stirred when the cabin sounded different. A sharp crack from outside would bring them closer to the group. A long pause in wind would make them restless. These reactions were not taught. They developed naturally, shaped by repetition and necessity. Some historians have noted that this constant listening blurred the boundary between sleep and waking. Nights were not periods of complete rest, but cycles of light awareness. You feel this now. Sleep comes, but it never fully closes the door. Part of you remains tuned to the room, to the sounds that signal comfort or danger. The smell of the cabin deepens at night. Smoke settles into fabric. Earth releases a damp mineral scent as temperatures shift. These smells become part of the soundscape in a way, signaling stability. A sudden sharpness in the air often meant wind had found a new gap. You would feel it on your skin moments later. Outside, the prairie speaks too. Distant animal calls drift across the dark. Coyotes yip and fall silent. Livestock shift and snort in their pens. These sounds reassure you that life continues beyond your walls. When animals go quiet, you listen more closely. Cold often deepens in those moments. There is still disagreement among researchers about how much these sounds affected pioneer stress levels. Some argue constant noise heightened anxiety. Others believe familiarity reduced fear. From where you lie now, wrapped in quilts and listening to the steady rhythm of the night, the answer feels simple. Knowing the sounds gives you control. Ignorance would be far worse. You lie awake briefly, cataloging what you hear. The fire speaks softly. The walls answer with muted creaks. Wind brushes rather than strikes. Everything is as it should be. Your breathing slows in response. Muscles release tension they did not realize they were holding. At some point, someone shifts nearby. Fabric rustles. A blanket slides slightly, then stills. The sound is close and human, grounding you. Shared space has its own music, and you recognize it now without thought. As the night deepens, sounds become fewer but clearer. Each one stands out against the quiet. A branch scrapes lightly along the roof. Ice cracks faintly somewhere outside. These noises arrive without urgency. You listen, acknowledge them, and let them pass. Toward the coldest hours, wind often returns with renewed strength. It tests the walls, searching for weakness. You hear it move around the cabin, circling, pressing. Inside, nothing changes. The earth bank holds. The gaps are filled. The fire still breathes. This contrast between outside force and inside steadiness brings a deep sense of relief. You wake briefly when a board snaps sharply, then relax as you recognize the sound. Wood responding to cold, not breaking. Experience has given you this distinction. Earlier in the season, such a noise would have sent you fully awake, heart racing. Now it barely lifts you from sleep. Sound becomes your reassurance that systems are working. Fire, shelter, shared warmth, all announce themselves quietly through the night. When they speak, you rest easier. As dawn approaches, sound shifts again. Wind softens. The fire settles into its final embers. Outside, birds test the air with tentative calls. These are the first sounds of morning, and they arrive gently, almost respectfully. You open your eyes before light reaches the floor. The cabin feels calm. The night has passed without incident. You sit up slowly, listening one last time. Everything sounds right. Rising from your bedding, you feel stiff but rested. The night did not steal more than you could give. Sound guided you through it, warning when needed, soothing when possible. As you move to stir the fire, you carry this lesson with you. Survival here is not only seen or felt, it is heard. The night speaks constantly. Once you learn its language, it stops shouting and begins to whisper. You breathe in, listening to the familiar creaks and murmurs of morning. Another night completed. Another quiet negotiation with winter concluded successfully. Cold changes the way you think about food. It stops being something you enjoy and becomes something you rely on. By the time winter nights stretch long and unforgiving, you understand that warmth does not come only from fire or fabric. It also comes from inside your own body, built slowly from what you eat before the sun disappears. Evenings begin earlier now. As light fades, attention turns toward the pot. Meals are simple but deliberate. Heavy, slow-burning foods are favored. Stews simmer longer than seems necessary, thickened with grains or roots, anything that will take time to digest. People noticed early on that a full stomach carried warmth deeper into the night than a thin meal ever could. Personal accounts from the frontier repeatedly mention the comfort of hot food before sleep. It was not just physical. The act itself marked a transition from labor to rest. You sit close to the fire, bowl in hand, feeling heat rise from the food as much as from the flames. Steam brushes your face, softening the sharpness the cold has carved there all day. You eat slowly, even when hungry. Rushing would waste the heat. Each mouthful spreads warmth gradually, settling into your chest and stomach. You feel it begin to work before the bowl is empty, a subtle easing of tension in your limbs. This sensation becomes familiar, a signal that your body is being given what it needs to last the night. An odd habit appears in many winter diaries. Some families saved their fattiest foods for evening meals, believing they helped sustain warmth longer. Bacon, rendered fat, even thick gravies were favored at night rather than morning. Whether this belief was based on observation or instinct hardly mattered. It felt true when the cold pressed hardest. There has long been discussion among historians about how well pioneer diets supported winter survival. Nutrition varied widely depending on region and fortune. What remains consistent is the emphasis placed on evening meals. People recognized that calories consumed at night played a different role than those eaten earlier. You feel that difference now as you finish eating and remain comfortably warm longer than expected. Children are fed carefully. Portions are smaller, but warmth is prioritized. You make sure they eat something hot, even if appetite is low. Many settlers noted that children who skipped warm evening meals woke colder and more restless. Tonight, You wait until bowls are scraped clean before settling them near the fire. After eating, movement slows. The body wants to hold on to the heat it has just gained. You resist the urge to pace or work. This pause matters. Heat gained through food can be lost just as quickly through unnecessary motion. You sit, breathe, and let warmth sink inward. The smell of the meal lingers in the cabin, mixing with smoke and earth. It becomes part of the night's atmosphere. Even hours later, when the fire burns low, you can still sense it faintly, a reminder that nourishment has been taken in and is still doing its work. As bedtime approaches, you notice how much calmer everyone becomes after eating. Voices drop, movements soften, the sharp edge of hunger disappears, replaced by a steady contentment. This effect appears often in pioneer writings, described not as happiness, but as readiness, ready to face the night without distraction. Some modern scholars suggest that this ritual of eating before sleep helped regulate stress as much as body temperature. A fed body relaxes more easily. Lying here now, you feel that truth. Muscles release their grip, breathing deepens, sleep waits closer to the surface. You settle into your bedding with warmth still lingering in your core. Quilts are pulled up, bodies cluster. The fire is banked low. Outside, the cold sharpens, but inside, the heat from food holds steady. It does not overwhelm. It supports. During the night, you wake briefly and notice the difference. Instead of cold gripping your stomach or chest, it reaches first for your hands and feet. Your center remains warm longer, protected by the slow work of digestion. You adjust a blanket, tuck a sleeve, and drift back to sleep without fully waking. In the deepest hours, when the fire is nearly gone, this internal warmth becomes essential. Without it, the night would feel much longer. You sense, when it begins to fade, a subtle cooling from the inside out. By then, dawn is not far behind. Toward morning, hunger returns gently, not as urgency, but as awareness. The body is ready for the next cycle. You wake knowing that breakfast will matter again, but that last night's meal carried you far enough. As light filters through the cracks in the walls, you sit up slowly. The cabin feels cold again, but not punishing. You are stiff, tired, but intact. Another night has passed without incident. During the day, you plan meals with more intention than ever. Supplies are counted, fat is saved, grain is measured, evening meals are protected from waste. This planning becomes as important as fuel gathering or mending clothes. Food is warmth stored for later use. When evening comes again, the routine repeats. Fire is built, pot is set, heat rises. You eat with purpose, not indulgence. Each bite is part of a strategy that extends beyond taste. As you lie down once more, warmth settles into your chest, steady and reassuring. The night will test you again, as it always does, but you face it nourished, prepared from the inside out. Sleep comes more easily now, carried on full bellies and familiar routines. Outside, winter presses on without mercy. Inside, simple meals continue their quiet work, turning food into endurance, and endurance into rest. You notice the water before you notice anything else. It sits in its container near the wall, perfectly still, a dull skin forming across the surface. When you touch it, your finger meets resistance. Ice. Inside the cabin. That moment lands quietly but firmly. Cold is no longer just outside pressing in. It has crossed the threshold. This is when you begin to understand that water is as vulnerable to winter as people are. On the frontier, keeping water usable through the night became one of the most persistent challenges families faced. Written accounts make it clear that frozen water inside shelters was not unusual during deep winter. It was expected, planned for, worked around. You adjust quickly. Water is moved closer to the fire before nightfall, but not too close. Too much heat cracks containers. Too little turns them solid. This careful placement becomes routine. You learn where warmth lingers longest and where cold settles fastest. The cabin develops invisible zones that you memorize without realizing. A small but revealing habit appears in many personal journals. Some families wrapped water containers in cloth or tucked them beneath bedding at night. It seems impractical at first, but the logic becomes clear when you try it. Body heat keeps water liquid longer than fire ever could once embers fade. You do the same now, sliding a covered container near your feet before sleep. Even so, ice still forms. You wake to find thin sheets floating on the surface, easily broken but persistent. This becomes part of morning routine. Ice is cracked and pushed aside before use. No one complains. This is simply how winter behaves. Water freezes fastest near the floor. You notice this after losing an entire container one night. By morning, it is solid from top to bottom, useless until thawed. After that, nothing important is stored low again. Shelves are added where possible. Containers are lifted. Small adjustments make large differences. There is still disagreement among historians about how often settlers went without usable water overnight. Some argue that most families managed to keep small amounts liquid. Others believe frozen water was a nightly reality during the coldest months. From your perspective, both can be true. Some nights succeed, others do not. The struggle with water shapes nighttime habits. You drink less before sleep, knowing that getting up in the cold is costly. Children are encouraged to drink earlier in the evening. Nighttime thirst is managed with patience rather than convenience. Bodies adapt, just as routines do. Morning becomes a time of restoration. Frozen containers are brought closer to the fire. Ice melts slowly, unevenly. Steam rises faintly as warmth returns. This process takes time, and time matters in the cold. You learn to begin early, knowing that water needed later must be thawed well in advance. An unexpected workaround appears in some settlements. Snow is melted directly when water freezes completely. This method is inefficient, requiring more fuel, but it works in emergencies. You try it once when a container cracks from the cold. Snow melts into water with a faint, earthy taste. It is not ideal, but it sustains. Water for washing becomes rare. Hygiene adjusts to the season. Hands are wiped rather than washed when possible. Faces are cleaned with cloth warmed near the fire. Many frontier letters mention the discomfort of winter cleanliness, but also the acceptance of it. Warmth takes priority over ritual. At night, water becomes something you guard mentally. You think about it as you lie down. Is it close enough to warmth? Is it covered? Will it freeze by morning? These thoughts pass through your mind without anxiety now. They are simply part of the checklist winter requires. The coldest nights test every precaution. Even water kept near the fire may freeze once embers fade. You wake to find containers stiff and silent. There is frustration in these moments, but also resignation. Winter has its limits, and sometimes it reaches them. Children are taught to respect water during winter, not to spill it, not to waste it, not to expect it to behave as it does in warmer months. These lessons are absorbed quickly. You see it in how carefully they handle cups, how they pause before pouring, how they wait patiently for ice to melt. Some researchers suggest that managing water in winter shaped frontier attitudes toward conservation long after the cold months passed. Living through nights where water became unusable left a lasting impression. You feel that shift happening now. Every drop carries weight. As the night deepens, the cabin grows quieter, the fire burns low. Water containers are checked one last time. You adjust one slightly, pulling it closer to retained warmth. Then you settle in, knowing that whatever happens, you will deal with it in the morning. Sleep comes in short stretches. When you wake briefly, you think of water again, not with worry, but with awareness. Cold sharpens priorities. Food, warmth, water, everything else fades. Toward dawn, the cold tightens once more. You wake fully and listen. The cabin holds. The fire still glows faintly. You reach for the container near your bedding and feel liquid move inside. Relief comes quietly. Small success. When light finally arrives, you rise stiffly and begin the thawing process for what froze overnight. Ice cracks. Steam lifts. The day begins again, shaped by lessons learned in the dark. Managing water through the night teaches you patience above all else. Nothing can be rushed. Heat must be guided. Cold must be anticipated. You learn to think hours ahead rather than minutes. As evening returns once more, you prepare again. Containers moved, cloth wrapped, placement adjusted. These actions feel automatic now. Another system in place. Another problem negotiated rather than solved. When you lie down, you do so knowing that water will behave as it chooses. You have done what you can. That acceptance brings calm. Winter here is not about control. It is about readiness. Sleep settles gently over you as the cabin breathes around you. Outside, the cold remains relentless. Inside, small strategies continue their quiet work, keeping water usable, life moving, and mornings possible. Illness arrives quietly in winter. It does not announce itself with drama. It slips in during moments of weakness, when bodies are already tired from cold and nights are long and restless. You learn to watch for it the way you watch the fire or the wind, with attention sharpened by experience. The first signs are small: a cough that lingers too long, a child who stays cold even near the fire, a stiffness that does not ease after warming food. On the frontier, sickness rarely came alone. It traveled with cold, hunger, and exhaustion, each one making the others harder to fight. Settlers quickly understood that winter illness was less about sudden infection and more about bodies worn down over time. Many letters from the period describe people falling sick after weeks of poor sleep and constant exposure rather than after any single event. You feel that truth now. When sleep is thin, the body has little left to give. The bed becomes the center of care, not just a place to rest, but a strategy. When someone grows ill, they are kept warm above all else. Extra quilts are added. Bodies are arranged around them to share heat. Movement is minimized. The goal is not comfort in the modern sense. It is stability. You notice how quickly routines shift when illness appears. Fuel is used more generously. The fire is kept steadier through the night. Hot food is saved for the sick first. These choices are made without discussion. Survival here depends on keeping every body functional, and illness threatens that balance. An often overlooked detail in frontier life involves how people treated fever during winter. Rather than cooling the body as we might today, settlers focused on preventing chills. Sudden cold could worsen weakness quickly. Warmth was considered protective, even when skin burned with heat. Whether this was medically sound remains debated, but it reflects a deep fear of cold stealing strength at the wrong moment. You sit close to someone coughing through the night, listening to each breath. Sleep becomes fragmented again, shaped by vigilance. When breathing changes, you wake. When shivering begins, you add another layer. This watchfulness becomes exhausting, yet it feels necessary. Many frontier caregivers wrote about nights spent counting breaths rather than sleeping. Children are especially vulnerable. Their fevers rise faster, their energy fades sooner. You watch them carefully, feeling foreheads with the back of your hand, noting changes in breathing and color. Night magnifies every worry. In daylight, illness feels manageable. In darkness, it feels unpredictable. There has never been full agreement among historians about how effective home care was during harsh winters. Medical help was often far away or non-existent. What is clear from personal accounts is that families relied heavily on warmth, rest, and simple remedies. Teas made from dried herbs, warm broths, gentle rubbing to restore circulation. The bed itself changes when illness enters. Sleeping arrangements shift to place the sick at the center of warmth. Others adjust around them, sacrificing comfort to maintain heat. Shared sleep becomes even more important. Isolation is avoided unless absolutely necessary. Alone, a sick body loses heat too quickly. You feel fear differently during these nights. It is quieter, more focused. You listen closely, not to the wind now, but to breathing. You notice how the fire sounds when you add fuel. Too much noise might wake someone struggling to rest. Everything slows. Some settlers believed that talking softly near the sick helped them hold on. Stories were whispered, familiar words repeated. Even silence was shared deliberately. Whether this eased recovery or simply eased fear, it mattered. You do the same, speaking gently, keeping presence constant. Toward the deepest part of the night, exhaustion presses hard. Your eyes burn, your body aches, yet sleep feels dangerous to surrender to fully. You rest in pieces, drifting for minutes at a time, waking often to check warmth and breathing. This pattern appears repeatedly in frontier journals, described with a mix of weariness and determination. When illness lingers for days, the strain becomes heavier. Fuel supplies shrink faster. Food stores are tested. The cold outside does not pause for recovery. Winter shows no mercy to weakness. You feel the weight of every decision more sharply now. And yet, there are nights when illness breaks. Fever eases, breathing steadies. The sick person sleeps more deeply. These moments bring quiet relief. You notice them first in small signs: less shivering, a calmer face, a hand that no longer grips blankets tightly. Morning light feels different after such a night. Hope enters cautiously. You still move carefully, knowing recovery is fragile. But the cabin feels lighter. The fire seems warmer. The cold outside feels less personal. Illness teaches you the value of rest in a place that rarely allows it. It forces the household to slow down, to prioritize care over productivity. Some settlers later wrote that winter sickness reshaped their understanding of strength. Endurance was not just about pushing through, it was about knowing when to stop. As days pass, routines gradually return. Extra quilts are folded back, fuel use stabilizes, sleep patterns even out. The memory of those nights lingers, though. You remember the sound of labored breathing, the tension of waiting, the relief of improvement. When evening comes again, you prepare the bed with care. You check layers. You plan fire management thoughtfully. You ensure food is ready. Illness has sharpened your awareness. You do not take warmth for granted anymore. As you lie down, you listen to the breathing around you. Steady, calm, familiar. The night feels quieter than before, not because winter has softened, but because you have learned how fragile comfort can be. Sleep arrives slowly but more fully tonight. Your body allows it, trusting that vigilance has done its work. Outside, the cold remains unchanged. Inside, the bed holds warmth, memory, and the quiet understanding that survival here depends as much on care as it does on endurance. You close your eyes, letting rest finally settle in. Another lesson absorbed, another night endured. Winter continues, but so do you. By midwinter, fear no longer arrives as panic. It comes as a low, steady presence, like the cold itself. You feel it most clearly at night, when work stops and thought takes over. The darkness presses close, and the mind looks for something solid to hold on to. This is where belief, routine, and quiet words begin to matter as much as fire or food. Evenings grow quieter once illness passes and routines settle. After the last log is placed and the children are arranged beneath blankets, conversation slows naturally. Voices drop without agreement. Someone murmurs a familiar phrase. Another answers softly. These exchanges are not dramatic. They are gentle, repetitive, and comforting. On the frontier, faith was often practiced in this way, woven into the night rather than declared. Many families carried small rituals into winter nights. A short prayer spoken from memory, a verse repeated until it became more rhythm than meaning. These habits appear frequently in personal writings, described without flourish. They were not always expressions of certainty. Often they were expressions of hope or simply habit, something known in a world that changed constantly. You participate without thinking much about it. Words come automatically now, spoken in a low tone that blends with the crackle of embers. They mark the shift from effort to rest, from doing to enduring. Even those who questioned belief still took comfort in the rhythm. Familiar phrases gave shape to the darkness. Stories follow naturally, not long ones, and not exciting ones. Small memories are shared quietly, a place left behind, a moment from earlier travel, something amusing that happened during the day. These stories are not meant to entertain so much as to remind everyone who they are beyond the cold. Laughter is rare, but smiles appear, brief and warm. Children respond to these moments quickly. Their bodies relax, breathing slows, eyes close sooner. Many settlers noted that storytelling helped children sleep through long winter nights better than silence alone. You see it now as a child drifts off mid-sentence, comforted by the sound of a familiar voice. There has been long discussion among historians about the role of faith in frontier survival. Some argue it provided emotional resilience. Others suggest practical routines mattered more. Lying here now, the distinction feels unnecessary. Belief, habit, and routine blend together. They create predictability, and predictability reduces fear. As the fire burns low, silence returns gently rather than abruptly. No one rushes it away. Silence is not empty anymore. It holds the weight of shared experience. The wind outside may howl, but inside, the quiet feels contained. You lie back and let the words fade. Thoughts slow. Fear loosens its grip. The mind, like the body, learns to conserve energy. Night after night of survival teaches this economy. Worry spends warmth too quickly. Some families kept small objects nearby during winter nights. A worn book, a carved piece of wood, a scrap of cloth from home. These items appear repeatedly in journals as sources of comfort. You have something similar now, kept close without ceremony. Touching it grounds you when the night feels too long. Sleep comes more smoothly after these rituals, not because the cold has changed, but because your response to it has. You no longer measure the night in hours. You measure it in breaths, in the steady rise and fall of the people around you. At some point, you wake briefly. The fire glows faintly. The cabin holds, wind presses, then moves on. You repeat a familiar phrase silently, not as a request, but as reassurance. It steadies your breathing. You drift back under. In the deepest part of the night, when fear once sharpened, there is now only alert calm. You listen. Everything sounds right. The system is holding. Shelter, warmth, shared presence. Belief, in whatever form it takes, has done its quiet work. Morning arrives without drama. Light slips in softly. You wake feeling tired but anchored. The night did not unravel you. It passed, carried by routine, words, and shared stillness. As you rise and tend the fire, you realize that courage here does not roar. It whispers. It sits beside you in the dark and stays until morning. Faith, whether spiritual or simply trust in routine, becomes another layer against the cold. When evening comes again, the same words will return, the same quiet stories, the same gentle transition into rest. Winter continues to test bodies, but these rituals protect something equally important, the will to face another night. You lie down again, listening to the low murmur of familiar voices fade into breathing. Fear softens, replaced by steadiness. The cold remains, but it no longer feels endless. Sleep settles in carefully, guided by repetition and trust. Outside, the prairie lies frozen and vast. Inside, a small circle of warmth holds, supported not only by fire and fabric, but by belief, habit, and the quiet courage of staying. Some nights do not give you warning. The day may pass quietly, the sky pale and calm, the wind barely moving at all. You prepare as usual, stacking fuel, checking water, arranging bedding. Everything feels familiar. Then, sometime after dark, the change arrives. Not slowly, all at once. You hear it first, a distant roar that does not belong to the usual wind. It sounds heavier, layered, like many directions moving at once. The cabin responds before you fully understand what is happening. Walls creak harder. The roof shudders faintly. Cold air pushes through seams with new force. This is not an ordinary night. Blizzards on the plains often arrived without much notice. Contemporary weather records and settler accounts alike describe storms forming quickly, driven by shifting pressure rather than visible buildup. You feel the truth of that now. The fire flickers wildly as gusts pull at the opening above it. Smoke moves unpredictably, stinging eyes and throats. You move faster than thought. Extra fuel is brought closer. Water is checked. Blankets are pulled tighter around children. No one panics, but urgency sharpens every movement. Storm nights demand attention, not fear. Outside, sound disappears almost completely beneath the wind. What remains is a deep, constant rush, like the world being erased inch by inch. Snow begins to drive against the walls, not falling so much as attacking. It finds every weakness, pressing into gaps you thought were sealed. You feel the temperature drop even inside the cabin. Wind strips heat aggressively, carrying it away faster than fire can replace it. This is when preparation reveals its value. Earth banked against walls slows the intrusion. Quilts trap warmth. Shared bodies hold heat close. Some frontier families wrote that storm nights were the most exhausting, even if no one left the cabin. The strain came from vigilance. Sleep became impossible. Someone stayed awake to tend the fire constantly, feeding it in small amounts to prevent flare-ups. You take your turn, eyes burning, hands stiff, listening to the storm test your shelter. Children sense the difference immediately. They wake more often, startled by noise and pressure. You murmur reassurance, pulling them closer, letting them feel steady, breathing and warmth. Words matter more during these moments. Calm spreads more quickly than fear. There remains disagreement among historians about how often entire families stayed awake through such nights. Accounts vary. What is clear is that rest came in fragments. You feel that now. You sit by the fire, half resting, half alert, letting minutes blur into each other. At times, the wind hits the cabin so hard it feels like a physical blow. Snow packs against walls, muffling sound but increasing pressure. You listen for new creaks, new pops, anything that signals damage. Every sound is evaluated instantly. Familiar, unfamiliar, dangerous. An odd but recurring detail appears in storm descriptions. Many settlers mentioned that the quiet after a gust was often more unsettling than the noise itself. You understand why. When the wind drops suddenly, you hold your breath, waiting to see what has changed. When it returns, you release tension slightly. Predictability becomes comfort. The fire struggles. Drafts pull heat upward. You adjust fuel placement, using slower burning material to maintain steady embers. Flames leap unpredictably, then settle. Smoke thickens, then clears. You accept discomfort to preserve warmth. Eyes water. Throats ache. Fire remains essential. Outside, the storm reshapes the land. You cannot see it, but you can feel it through the walls. Snow piles higher. Drifts form. Paths disappear. You know that morning will reveal a different world. As the night drags on, exhaustion presses hard. Muscles tremble from cold and tension. Yet you remain upright, driven by the knowledge that sleep could cost too much if vigilance lapses. These are the nights settlers later remembered most clearly, etched deep by adrenaline and relief. Toward the deepest hours, the storm begins to ease. Not suddenly, gradually. Gusts grow less violent. The roar softens. Snow still falls, but with less force. You notice it first in the fire, which steadies without constant adjustment. Relief arrives cautiously. No one celebrates yet. You wait. You listen. Only when the wind settles into something familiar do you allow yourself to sink closer to the bedding. Children, sensing the shift, sleep more deeply. Breathing evens out around you. Morning comes slowly. Light filters through cracks and reveals snow packed high against the cabin. Doors resist opening. Windows, if you have them, are blocked completely. But the shelter stands. The fire still glows faintly. Everyone inside is alive. You step outside briefly, pushing through snow that reaches your knees or higher. The world is unrecognizable. Landmarks are buried. Sound is muted. The storm has passed, leaving silence behind. You return inside quickly, cold biting fresh against your face. Warmth wraps around you again, imperfect but sufficient. The night is over. The storm did not win. These nights change you. They teach you respect for forces beyond preparation and confidence in the systems you have built. Fire, shelter, shared warmth, vigilance, all work together when it mattered most. As the day begins, you clear snow carefully, restoring access to fuel and water. Work resumes. The cycle continues. But something has shifted. You trust your ability to endure sudden danger now. The cold still threatens. Storms will come again, but you have faced one in the dark and remained standing. When evening returns, you prepare with fresh awareness. Extra fuel is stacked closer. Gaps are checked again. Bedding is arranged carefully. Storm nights leave no room for carelessness. As you lie down later, the memory of wind and snow lingers, but fear does not. Experience has replaced it. Sleep comes slowly, but it comes. Outside, the prairie lies buried and quiet. Inside, the cabin breathes steadily. Another night awaits. Whatever it brings, you will meet it with the same calm attention that carried you through the storm. When the storm leaves, it does not take the cold with it. Instead, it leaves behind a deeper stillness, one that feels heavier than wind ever did. Snow lies piled against the cabin walls, packed tight by its own weight. The land outside looks unfamiliar, softened and erased, as if winter has redrawn everything overnight. In this quiet, you begin to notice something else. Your way of surviving the night is changing, shaped not only by struggle, but by observation. You are not the first to live through winters like this. Long before wagons crossed the plains, others learned how to rest through cold that could kill. You begin to remember techniques you have seen nearby, small details noticed during trading visits or brief encounters, ways of sleeping, ways of placing shelter, ways of working with winter instead of pushing against it. Some of the most effective ideas come from watching how indigenous families move and settle during cold seasons. You noticed it earlier without fully understanding. Shelters positioned to break wind rather than face it. Sleeping areas arranged low and compact. Heat conserved by design, not effort. Now, after weeks of fighting cold, these choices make more sense. You adjust small things first. Bedding is moved slightly away from outer walls, closer to the center of the space. The fire pit is shifted subtly to reduce drafts pulling heat upward too quickly. These changes feel minor, but the night responds immediately. Warmth lingers longer. The air inside moves less. One practice you adopt involves reducing empty space. Excess room wastes heat. Indigenous winter shelters were often intentionally low and tight, forcing warm air to remain close to bodies. You begin hanging extra cloth to lower the ceiling area, trapping warmth where you sleep. The cabin feels smaller, but more effective. There has long been disagreement among historians about how much settlers consciously learned from indigenous winter practices. versus rediscovering solutions on their own. What feels clear here is that observation mattered. People watched what worked and adapted it quietly. Survival rarely announced its sources. You also rethink how you sleep. Instead of spreading out, you keep bedding compact, limiting exposed edges. Blankets are tucked carefully beneath bodies, not draped loosely. This technique, seen often among winter camps nearby, reduces drafts and prevents heat from escaping upward. The difference is subtle but real. Fire use changes too. You burn less brightly, focusing on steady embers rather than open flame. Some indigenous groups favored heat retention over visible fire during sleep, relying on insulation and shared warmth. You follow this logic now, allowing the fire to settle lower before resting. Smoke lessens, air improves, warmth remains. An interesting detail appears in oral histories shared by elders nearby. They describe sleeping in stages, not all at once. Short periods of rest followed by brief waking moments to adjust heat and position. You recognize this pattern immediately. It mirrors what you already do instinctively. Hearing it named gives it meaning. Outside, snow reflects moonlight faintly, casting a pale glow through cracks in the walls. Inside, the cabin feels calmer than it did before the storm, less reactive, more intentional. You lie down with a sense of alignment rather than resistance. Some scholars continue to debate whether these adaptations significantly improved survival rates or simply eased discomfort. From where you rest now, the answer feels obvious. Comfort and survival are not separate here. Reduced strain preserves strength. Preserved strength carries you through winter. Children respond quickly to the changes. They settle faster. They wake less often. Their breathing stays deeper through the night. You notice this and adjust further, prioritizing these arrangements whenever possible. There is also a shift in mindset. Instead of bracing against cold, you begin to anticipate it with less tension. You expect it to behave in certain ways. You plan accordingly. This mental adjustment reduces fatigue as much as any physical change. As the night deepens, you wake briefly and listen. The wind is gone. Snow muffles sound outside. Inside, the fire murmurs softly. The cabin holds heat better than it did weeks ago. You pull a blanket edge tighter and rest again. You think briefly of the people who lived through winters like this, generation after generation, how their knowledge accumulated quietly, passed through demonstration rather than instruction. You are part of that chain now, learning through nights endured rather than lessons taught. Toward morning, the cold tightens again, but it feels contained. It presses at the edges without reaching your core. You wake with stiffness, but not with dread. That difference matters. When light returns, you rise and make small notes in your mind. What worked? What could improve? Winter becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. Harsh, but consistent. As evening approaches again, you repeat the adjusted routines without hesitation. Bedding arranged low and tight, fire managed gently, space reduced, bodies clustered. The night receives these preparations without protest. You lie down and let warmth gather slowly. Outside, the land remains buried and quiet. Inside, sleep comes easier, guided by borrowed wisdom and hard-earned experience. The cold has not changed. You have. And that change carries you forward, night by night, deeper into winter, with steadier breath and quieter fear. You notice the animals long before you think about warmth. Their sounds change at night. Hooves shift. A low breath clouds the air. There is movement just beyond the walls, heavy and slow, and it reminds you that you are not the only living thing fighting the cold. Out here, survival is shared across species, whether planned or not. During the day, livestock are kept at a distance, organized, managed. At night in winter, those boundaries soften. Animals are brought closer, not out of sentiment, but out of understanding. Warm bodies radiate heat. Sheltering them nearby protects them from wind, and in return, they give something back. You feel it when you step outside after dark. The air near the animals is different, slightly warmer, less sharp. Their presence breaks the wind, disrupts the flow of cold air across the ground. Settlers notice this quickly, especially those without solid barns. Keeping animals near the cabin reduced losses and eased the cold pressing against walls. Some families built small pens directly against their shelters. Others stacked hay or equipment between animals and living spaces, creating windbreaks that served double duty. You do the same now, adjusting what you have. The smell is strong, earthy, animal. It clings to clothes and skin. Yet in winter, that smell becomes associated with safety. Inside the cabin, you notice the difference almost immediately. The walls no longer feel as cold to the touch. Sound changes too. The wind meets resistance outside before it reaches you. Even when gusts rise, they feel blunted, absorbed by the presence of living mass nearby. An odd detail appears repeatedly in frontier writings. People often mentioned sleeping better when animals were close, even if the noise was greater. Familiar sounds replaced the emptiness of the open prairie. Snorts and shifts were grounding, a reminder that warmth existed beyond human bodies alone. There has been debate among historians about how hygienic or risky this practice was. Illness could spread. Smells were intense. Yet winter narrowed choices. Protection from exposure often outweighed long-term concerns. From your position now, lying warm while animals breathe steadily outside, the decision feels clear. You arrange bedding with this in mind. The warmest areas of the cabin are now closer to the shared wall. Children are placed there first. Blankets are adjusted to take advantage of the retained heat. Even a small rise in temperature matters when nights stretch long. Animals sense the arrangement too. They settle more quickly when sheltered. Movements slow. Sounds soften. Their calm feeds yours. The night becomes less restless on both sides of the wall. You wake briefly when a larger animal shifts its weight outside. The sound is deep and slow, not alarming. You recognize it now without thought. These sounds join the night's rhythm, as familiar as wind or fire. They fade back into background noise as sleep returns. Some settlers believed animals could sense storms before humans did. Whether this was true or not, people paid attention to changes in behavior. Restlessness signaled weather shifts. Calm suggested stability. You listen for these cues now, adding them to the language of the night you have learned. As hours pass, warmth holds better than expected. The fire burns low, quilts do their work, bodies cluster. Outside, animals act as living insulation, holding back the worst of the cold. You feel the difference in your breathing, less shallow, less tense. In the deepest part of the night, you wake fully for a moment. Everything feels still. The fire murmurs faintly. The cabin walls are quiet. Outside, animals breathe in slow rhythm. This layered presence creates a sense of enclosure that did not exist earlier in the winter. The prairie feels farther away. Toward morning, cold tightens again. You notice it first in your hands, then in your feet. But the chill arrives more slowly than before. You pull a blanket edge higher and rest again, grateful for every small advantage. At dawn, light reveals steam rising from animals as they stir. Frost clings to their backs, sparkling briefly before melting. You step outside and feel the contrast immediately. The air beyond their shelter is sharper, more aggressive. You return quickly, understanding once again how much their presence matters. During the day, care continues. Animals are fed well. Water is checked. Their health matters now more than ever. A weak animal loses heat faster and gives less back. This interdependence shapes behavior. You protect them not only for future work, but for nightly survival. Some families went further, bringing smaller animals inside entirely. Chickens, dogs, even young livestock shared indoor space during the coldest stretches. This practice varied widely. For some, it was essential. For others, it was avoided. You consider it carefully, weighing space, cleanliness, and heat. As evening returns, animals are settled early. Hay is arranged to block wind. Openings are reduced. The routine becomes familiar. The night is prepared for not just inside the cabin, but beyond it. When you lie down later, the cabin feels different, more anchored, less exposed. The cold still presses, but it encounters resistance layered in living forms. Fire, fabric, bodies, animals, all working quietly together. Sleep comes in waves, deeper than before. When you wake briefly, you hear breathing outside and inside, overlapping. The sound is steady, reassuring. You drift again. By the time morning returns, stiffness greets you as always. But dread does not. The night has passed with fewer interruptions. Another small adjustment has made its difference. As winter continues, this arrangement remains. Animals close, shelter shared indirectly, warmth multiplied by proximity. It is not elegant, it is not clean, it is effective. You move through the day with renewed steadiness, planning the next night without anxiety. The cold remains relentless, but you have learned that survival here is layered. Every presence matters, every body contributes. When evening comes again, You welcome the familiar sounds outside as you settle in. Another night begins. You close your eyes knowing you are not facing it alone, not even just with your family, but with every warm breath gathered around you in the dark. There are nights when the cold feels personal, not because it is stronger, but because you feel smaller against it. These are the nights when the prairie seems endless, and the cabin feels like a fragile interruption rather than a refuge. Loneliness arrives quietly then, slipping in between the cracks the cold cannot quite reach. You lie awake longer on these nights, even when everything else is working as it should. The fire holds, the bedding is warm, bodies are close, yet your thoughts wander outward, drifting beyond the walls to places left behind. Homes that no longer exist for you in any practical sense. Faces you may never see again. Winter stretches memory thin and long. Frontier letters often speak of isolation more than hardship. People wrote about missing voices, about silence that felt heavier than hunger. Out here, distance is not measured in miles alone. It is measured in nights without conversation beyond your own walls. You feel that weight now, pressing gently but persistently. The prairie at night amplifies this feeling. Sound travels differently in cold air. A single distant call can echo for minutes, reminding you how empty the land truly is. When nothing calls back, the silence settles deep. You become acutely aware of how few you are, how far you have traveled from anything familiar. You adjust your position slightly, seeking comfort in physical closeness. Shared warmth helps, but it does not erase the quiet. You listen to breathing around you, counting rhythms without intention. These sounds anchor you, reminding you that while the land is vast, you are not alone in this room. Some settlers described loneliness as a greater challenge than cold. The body adapts to temperature, the mind struggles with absence. You understand that now. Cold can be blocked, slowed, managed. Loneliness requires patience and time. You think of evenings from another life, filled with noise and light. The contrast sharpens the stillness around you, yet you also notice something else. The quiet here has texture. It is not empty. It holds the sounds of wind brushing snow, of fire settling, of animals breathing nearby. It is different from silence. It is presence without conversation. There is an unspoken agreement among everyone in the cabin on nights like this. No one forces sleep. No one speaks unnecessarily. Comfort comes from sharing the space, not filling it. This shared acceptance appears often in frontier journals, described as sitting together without words, letting the night pass. You wake briefly and find someone else awake too. Eyes meet in the dim light. No words are exchanged. A blanket edge is adjusted. That is enough. This quiet understanding carries weight. Loneliness sharpens thoughts, but it also deepens awareness. You notice small things more clearly, the way frost patterns form near cracks, the faint glow of embers beneath ash, the steady rhythm of an animal shifting outside. These details fill the space where conversation might otherwise live. Some historians suggest that frontier isolation fostered a kind of inward focus, forcing people to reckon with themselves more directly. Lying here now, you feel that pull inward. Without distraction, thoughts surface more easily. Fears, hopes, regrets. Winter offers no escape from them. Yet there is also a slow transformation that happens during these long nights. Loneliness loses its sharp edge over time. It becomes familiar, less threatening. You learn to sit with it rather than push it away. This acceptance does not come quickly. It arrives after many nights, layered like everything else here. Children experience this differently. They miss playmates. They ask questions during the day that have no easy answers. At night, though, they sleep, held by warmth and routine. Adults carry the heavier weight of memory and expectation. You feel that now, as sleep stays just out of reach. To manage these nights, people developed small practices. Some kept journals, writing by firelight, until eyes burned with fatigue. Others carved wood or mended fabric quietly, giving hands something to do while minds settled. You have your own version now. A simple, repetitive task, done in low light, not to produce anything useful, but to occupy thought. As the hours pass, the loneliness eases slightly, not because it disappears, but because fatigue softens its grip. You lie back, letting the steady presence of others ground you again. The night continues without urgency. Toward the coldest part of the night, you wake fully and feel a brief surge of vulnerability. The cabin seems small, the prairie feels infinite. You remind yourself of what has been done: shelter built, fire tended, systems in place. This quiet accounting steadies you. Morning eventually arrives, as it always does. Light filters in gently, breaking the spell of isolation. Movement returns. Voices rise slightly. The world expands again. Loneliness retreats, waiting for the next long night. During the day, you work with renewed focus. Activity pushes thoughts outward. Practical tasks reclaim space in your mind. Yet you know the night will return, and with it, the quiet. As evening approaches again, you prepare not only the cabin, but yourself. You accept that some nights will feel heavier than others. This acceptance reduces their power. Loneliness becomes another element to manage, like cold or hunger. When you lie down again, the space feels less threatening. You breathe slowly, listening to familiar sounds. You remind yourself that survival here is not just physical, it is emotional. It requires patience with yourself as much as with winter. Sleep comes eventually, shallow but sufficient. Outside, the prairie remains vast and silent. Inside, warmth holds, shared among bodies and breaths. You drift off knowing that loneliness may visit again, but it no longer defines the night. It is one presence among many, held in check by routine, by proximity, and by the quiet knowledge that dawn always follows. Night has a way of revealing which tools you truly depend on. In daylight, broken handles and dull edges feel inconvenient. After dark, when cold stiffens, fingers and shadows swallow details, those same failures become serious. You learn this lesson gradually, through small frustrations that accumulate until you cannot ignore them. It begins with something simple, a latch that sticks when you try to secure the door, a flint that refuses to spark on the first strike, a knife that slips because the handle has shrunk in the cold. These moments cost heat. Every extra second spent wrestling with an object invites the cold closer to your skin. Frontier accounts repeatedly describe winter as a season that exposed weak equipment. Metal became brittle, wood cracked without warning, leather stiffened until it barely bent. Tools that worked perfectly well in summer behaved like strangers at night. You feel that now as you struggle briefly with something that once felt reliable. You adapt quickly. Tools are kept closer to the fire during evening hours. Not close enough to damage them, but close enough to keep them responsive. Blades are wiped dry. Handles are checked for cracks. Small maintenance becomes a nightly ritual, performed with care rather than urgency. There is a quiet awareness that mistakes cost more in the dark. Dropping a tool means bare hands on cold ground. Losing a piece of equipment in low light may mean not finding it until morning. Settlers often wrote about tools disappearing into snowdrifts overnight, effectively gone until spring. You move more deliberately now, counting objects before settling in. Lighting itself becomes a fragile resource. Candles burn quickly and must be rationed. Oil lamps smoke and flicker, casting unreliable shadows. Firelight does most of the work, but it reaches only so far. Beyond its glow, the cabin fades into suggestion rather than certainty. You learn to memorize the layout of the space so you can move without seeing. An interesting habit appears in many winter journals. People arranged essential tools in the same positions every night, touching them into place without looking. Muscle memory replaced sight. You do the same now, sliding items into familiar spots where your hands can find them in the dark. At some point during the night, you wake to adjust the fire and find that a tool has shifted. It takes longer than usual to locate. Frustration flares briefly, sharp and hot against the cold. You breathe, slow down, feel for familiar shapes. Panic wastes warmth. Patience restores it. There is disagreement among historians about how often tool failure directly caused winter injuries. What is clear from personal accounts is that frustration and fatigue led to mistakes. A slipped blade, a dropped ember, a missed step. Night magnifies consequences. You become cautious. Tasks are simplified after dark. Anything that can wait until morning does. Fire tending is done with minimal movement. Water is checked quietly. Doors are secured once and left alone. This restraint conserves energy and reduces risk. Children are taught these rules early. Do not touch tools at night unless asked. Do not move objects near the fire. Do not wander beyond the light. These instructions are not delivered harshly. They are absorbed through repetition and example. Night has its own order. The cold alters your hands in subtle ways. Fingers lose sensitivity. Fine movements become harder. Buttons resist. Knots stiffen. You compensate by preparing ahead. Clothing is arranged so it can be adjusted easily. Containers are left slightly loose. Nothing is sealed too tightly before sleep. A curious detail emerges in several frontier descriptions. People often kept a single multi-purpose tool within arm's reach at night. Something simple and reliable. A knife, a poker, an iron hook. You do the same now, placing it where you can reach it without sitting up fully. This small precaution brings peace of mind. Outside, tools are even less forgiving. If something breaks during a storm night, repair may be impossible until daylight. This reality shapes daytime priorities. You mend early, you replace weak parts before they fail. Winter punishes delay. As the night deepens, you wake briefly to a new sound. A faint rattle. You identify it quickly. A loose hinge responding to the cold. You make a mental note to fix it in the morning. Not now. Now is for rest. There is a certain humility that comes with these lessons. You realize how dependent you are on simple objects behaving as expected. In warmer seasons, tools feel like extensions of your will. In winter nights, they feel like companions that require care and respect. Toward morning, when cold tightens its grip once more, you reach for a familiar item and feel reassurance in its presence. It works. That reliability matters more than you would have imagined months ago. Dawn arrives quietly. Light reveals what the dark hid. A crack in a handle. A frayed strap. You address these issues immediately, before night returns. Winter encourages this diligence, not through instruction, but through consequence. As evening approaches again, tools are checked and placed deliberately. Lighting is prepared. Firewood is arranged. Everything has its place. This order reduces effort later, when effort costs too much. When you lie down, you know that the night will test small things again. A latch, a spark, a grip. You feel ready for that test now, not because the tools are perfect, but because you have learned to work within their limits. Sleep settles slowly. Outside, the cold waits. Inside, your careful arrangements hold. The night passes without incident, carried by preparation and restraint. By morning, stiffness returns as always, but frustration does not. Another system has been learned, another vulnerability addressed. You rise and tend the fire, feeling steady. Winter has taught you that survival here depends not only on strength or courage, but on attention to the smallest details, especially when the light is gone. Another day begins. Another night will follow. You will meet it with hands that know where to reach, even in the dark. By now, winter advice no longer comes from instruction. It comes from observation, whispered comments, and the quiet authority of people who have already endured more nights than you have. These are not formal lessons. They are fragments, offered casually during daylight work, or shared softly near the fire when the night stretches long. You begin to notice how seasoned neighbors move differently. They prepare earlier. They pause more often. Their actions seem unhurried, but nothing is wasted. This calm efficiency draws your attention. It is the kind of confidence that comes only from repetition. Someone mentions, almost in passing, that it is better to let the fire burn lower before sleep than to keep feeding it late. Another notes that shifting bedding just a few inches away from the wall made a difference they could feel by morning. These remarks are not framed as advice. They are shared as experience, left for you to accept or ignore. Frontier life produced few manuals, but it produced many such moments. Knowledge traveled this way, carried by proximity rather than writing. You listen closely now, storing these insights away. Winter has made you receptive. One neighbor tells you they always loosen their outer layers before lying down, even when the cold feels sharp. Trapped heat leads to sweat, and sweat steals warmth later. You test this idea and feel the difference within a night. Your sleep improves slightly. Your body wakes less tense. Another mentions that silence can be useful. They avoid unnecessary noise after dark, believing it helps the mind settle and preserves energy. You try this too, letting the cabin remain quiet, except for essential movement. The night feels longer at first, then gentler. There is also advice about timing. Eat earlier, rest sooner. Do not wait for exhaustion before stopping work. Several experienced settlers noted that pushing too hard late in the day led to colder nights and weaker mornings. You adjust your schedule accordingly, ending labor while light still lingers. Some of the most valuable guidance concerns what not to do. Do not chase every draft in the dark. Do not rebuild at night unless danger is immediate. Do not waste fuel trying to make the cabin feel warm instead of manageable. These cautions appear repeatedly in personal accounts, often learned through regret. You remember a comment about doors. Always clear snow away from them before nightfall, even if the storm seems light. More than one family learned too late how quickly an exit could disappear by morning. You make this a habit now, checking pathways before settling in. Another tip involves waking. Do not rush from bedding when you stir. Sit first. Let blood move. Sudden movement in extreme cold invites dizziness and strain. You follow this guidance carefully, feeling its benefit in your joints and breath. Some researchers suggest that such practical wisdom formed a kind of informal education system on the frontier. There were no classrooms, but winter taught relentlessly. Those who learned survived more easily. Those who ignored experience paid for it in discomfort, or worse. You share what you have learned too, without realizing it. A comment to someone newer, a small adjustment demonstrated rather than explained. Advice flows both ways, shaped by trust and shared hardship. As night arrives again, you feel the accumulation of these lessons. Preparation feels smoother. Decisions come faster. You no longer question every choice. You rely on what has worked before, refined by new insight. You arrange bedding based on advice you once thought unnecessary. You bank the fire as suggested. You leave a tool within reach, exactly where someone once pointed out. Each small act carries weight now. When you lie down, the cabin feels different. Not warmer, exactly, but more settled. There is less uncertainty. The night no longer feels like an opponent. It feels like a condition to move within. Sleep comes in steady intervals. You wake occasionally, as always, but without alarm. Each waking is purposeful. A blanket, adjusted, a log shifted, then rest again. The night unfolds without surprise. Toward morning, cold tightens briefly. You notice it, respond, and let it pass. The advice you have gathered works together, layering effect upon effect. No single tip solves everything. Together, they make winter livable. Dawn arrives with pale light and familiar stiffness. You rise slowly, remembering to pause, letting warmth return before moving fully. Your body responds better now. Less resistance, less shock. During the day, you repeat what you have seen others do. Small repairs made early, fuel gathered before it is urgent, water checked before it freezes solid. These habits carry forward, reinforced by quiet approval from those who recognize them. As evening approaches again, you realize something important. Winter wisdom is not about mastery. It is about humility, knowing when to listen, knowing when to stop, knowing that survival often depends on small choices repeated consistently. You prepare the cabin one more time, guided by lessons absorbed rather than taught. When you lie down, there is a sense of continuity. You are part of a pattern now, linked to others who learned the same way, under the same conditions. Sleep settles gently. Outside, winter remains unyielding. Inside, experience holds its ground. Another night passes, another day will follow, and with each one, the quiet knowledge of how to endure deepens, carried forward without ceremony, shared through action rather than words. Sleep, when it finally arrives, is not what you once imagined it would be. It is not deep, uninterrupted, or indulgent. It is earned in fragments, stitched together from moments of warmth and calm. And yet, you come to value it more than any long, unbroken rest you remember from before winter claimed your nights. You settle down carefully now, aware that the position you choose matters. Too close to the wall invites cold. Too close to the fire risks uneven heat and restless dreams. You find the place that feels balanced, guided by instinct, sharpened through repetition. The body remembers what the mind no longer needs to calculate. As you lie still, warmth gathers slowly beneath the quilts. It does not rush. It builds, breath by breath, held in place by fabric, by bodies, by the small improvements you have made over many nights. This waiting becomes part of the process. You do not expect comfort instantly anymore. You allow it time. Your breathing changes first. It deepens, slows. The tightness that followed you through the evening loosens its grip. Muscles soften incrementally. The cold remains present, but it recedes to the edges of awareness, rather than pressing at the center. Sleep comes in waves. You drift, surface, drift again. Each return to awareness is gentle rather than jarring. You listen briefly, confirm that everything is as it should be, then let go again. This rhythm becomes familiar. It feels safe. Many people who lived through frontier winters later wrote that they learned to rest without fully surrendering consciousness. The mind stayed lightly anchored to the surroundings, alert enough to respond, but relaxed enough to recover. You recognize this state now. It is neither wakefulness nor full sleep, but something in between that serves you better than either alone. You dream differently in this cold. Dreams are shorter, less elaborate. They fade quickly when you wake, leaving impressions rather than stories. Often they blend with the sounds around you. The crackle of embers becomes part of the dream. The wind becomes a distant presence within it. You wake unsure where one ended and the other began. At times, you wake fully and feel a brief surge of discomfort. A foot has slipped from under the blankets. A sleeve has ridden up. Cold bites sharply for a moment. You respond without frustration, adjusting fabric, pulling warmth back into place. This reaction is automatic now. Panic has no role here. Children sleep deeper than you do, but even they stir occasionally. A soft sound, a small movement. You adjust without opening your eyes fully. Shared sleep creates shared responsibility, even in rest. There are moments when exhaustion presses so heavily that you slip into deeper sleep than usual. When you wake from these moments, there is brief confusion. Where am I? What time is it? The cold answers quickly, grounding you again. You orient yourself by feel rather than sight, confirming warmth, listening for familiar sounds. Some historians suggest that this kind of sleep strengthened resilience over time, teaching people to recover with less rest. Others argue it wore bodies down slowly. From your position now, both feel true. You are tired in ways that sleep does not entirely erase. Yet you continue, adapting, enduring. As the night progresses, sleep becomes easier. The cold stabilizes. The fire settles. Sounds grow predictable. You slip into longer stretches of rest, waking less often. When you do wake, it is not with alarm, but with calm awareness. Toward the deepest hours, you feel a sense of closeness to morning, even without knowing the time. The night has a shape now. You recognize where you are within it. This familiarity brings peace. The unknown has narrowed. You dream briefly of warmth that is not threatened. Sunlight, still air. The dream fades as quickly as it arrives, replaced by the steady reality of the cabin. You do not feel disappointment. You feel grounded. At some point, the fire is little more than memory. Embers glow faintly. The cabin is cold, but controlled. You wake and listen. Everything holds. You allow yourself to rest again. When light finally begins to creep through the cracks, it does so gently. You wake before it reaches the floor, sensing the shift rather than seeing it. The cold sharpens slightly, signaling morning. Your body responds by pulling inward, conserving warmth until movement becomes necessary. You sit up slowly, following the advice you have learned. Let blood move. Let warmth return. You do not rush. Rushing wastes energy. As others stir, the shared space comes alive again. Blankets shift. Breathing changes. Quiet murmurs replace silence. Another night has passed. Not without effort, but without harm. You rise stiffly, joints protesting, muscles slow to respond. This stiffness is familiar now. It does not worry you. You move deliberately, coaxing circulation back with small motions. The fire is revived carefully, a small flame brought back from embers. Warmth spreads again, and with it, a sense of quiet accomplishment. Sleep did its work, even if it was imperfect. It restored enough strength to face the day. During daylight, you will work. You will gather fuel. You will make repairs. You will prepare for another night. Sleep here is not an escape from life. It is part of the cycle that makes life possible. As evening approaches again, you do not dread sleep. You respect it. You understand its limits and its value. When you lie down once more, you do so with patience rather than expectation. Sleep will come when it comes. You will meet it halfway, offering stillness and warmth in return. Outside, winter remains vast and indifferent. Inside, rest continues its quiet labor, night after night, carrying you forward one fragment at a time. You feel the change before you see it. The night still arrives cold, but it no longer bites with the same sharp intent. Somewhere beneath the layers of winter, the land begins to shift. The difference is subtle at first, almost imagined, a slightly softer breeze. A night where the fire lasts a little longer without extra fuel. A morning when your breath does not sting quite as fiercely. Spring does not announce itself here. It approaches cautiously, testing the ground the way you once tested the cold. You notice it most clearly at night. Sleep comes a little easier. The cabin holds warmth longer. You wake fewer times to adjust blankets or tend embers. These small mercies feel enormous after months of vigilance. The snow outside begins to settle differently. It no longer creaks sharply underfoot every morning. In places, it slumps and reshapes itself, edges rounding rather than breaking cleanly. During the day, sunlight lingers longer on the walls. During the night, that stored warmth releases slowly instead of vanishing all at once. Many frontier journals describe this period with a sense of disbelief. People did not trust the change at first. After weeks of cold that punished complacency, any easing felt suspicious. You share that caution now. You prepare the cabin as thoroughly as ever. You keep routines intact. Winter has taught you not to relax too quickly. Yet the nights continue to soften. The cold still arrives, but it settles rather than attacks. Wind moves with less urgency. Sound carries differently, less brittle, more forgiving. You lie awake one evening and realize you are listening out of habit rather than necessity. Sleep deepens during these nights. Not dramatically, but noticeably. You drift longer without waking. Dreams stretch a little further before fading. When you do wake, it is often because your body has rested enough, not because the cold demands attention. Children sense the change first. They wake with more energy. They fidget less at night. Their breathing stays deep, and even for longer stretches. You watch this with quiet relief. Their resilience carried them through winter, but the easing feels like a gift. The fire becomes less demanding. You still tend it carefully, but the margin for error widens. A missed moment does not immediately punish you. Embers hold longer. Heat lingers in the air. The cabin feels less fragile. Some historians have noted that this transitional period was emotionally complex for settlers. Relief mixed with exhaustion. Hope arrived before strength fully returned. Lying here now, you feel both. The nights are kinder, but your body carries the memory of vigilance. Letting go takes time. You notice how your thoughts change. Winter nights were filled with calculation. Heat, fuel, water, illness. Now, your mind wanders more freely. You think about repairs that can wait until warmer days, about planting, about movement beyond the cabin walls. There is a night when you wake and realize you have slept for hours without stirring. The fire has burned low. The cabin is cool, but not punishing. You lie still, surprised by the unfamiliar sensation of rest that feels complete. You breathe slowly, letting it sink in. Outside, the prairie begins to speak differently. Animals shift more often. Distant sounds return. Somewhere, water moves beneath ice. These signals reach you faintly through the walls, carried by air that no longer feels as heavy. You step outside one morning and notice moisture in the air. The cold still exists, but it carries softness with it. Your breath rises and falls without pain. The land feels patient rather than hostile. At night, you still cluster together. Habits do not dissolve overnight. Quilts remain layered. Fire is banked. Tools stay within reach. These routines have become part of you. Even as conditions improve, you honor what kept you safe. There is a moment, late one evening, when someone comments quietly on how warm it feels. The words are spoken carefully, as if naming it might tempt the cold to return. You smile without answering. You feel it too. Sleep comes easily that night. You do not fight it. You allow yourself to sink deeper than you have in months. Dreams come more fully now. They carry images of movement, of open spaces without fear. When you wake, light fills the cabin more generously than before. Morning feels less urgent. There is time to stretch, to breathe, to sit by the fire without rushing to rebuild it immediately. You recognize that winter has reshaped you. The cold taught discipline. The nights taught patience. The easing teaches gratitude. You do not forget what it cost to get here. As days lengthen, nights shorten. Darkness retreats earlier. The cold loosens its grip gradually, reluctantly. You watch this shift without celebration, but with deep appreciation. Another night arrives, gentle compared to those before. You lie down and realize you are no longer bracing yourself. You are resting. That difference feels profound. Spring is not here yet. Winter has not fully released you, but the nights have changed their tone. They are no longer threats, they are transitions. You close your eyes and let sleep come freely. Outside, the land prepares for its own renewal. Inside, you rest with the quiet knowledge that you have endured the hardest nights. The cold will fade. The lessons will remain. The last of winter nights do not feel triumphant. They feel reflective. You lie awake, not because the cold demands it, but because your mind is finally free to wander without urgency. The cabin still creaks. The fire still murmurs. Yet the edge has softened. Winter no longer feels like something to survive minute by minute. It feels like something you have already lived through. You notice how your body responds differently now. Movements are slower, not from stiffness alone, but from habit. You still pause before sitting up. You still check warmth before shifting position. These actions remain, even though the danger has eased. They are written into you now. Sleep comes steadily, then loosens, then returns. You drift between rest and memory. Nights that once blurred together begin to separate in your mind. The first bitter cold, the storm that shook the walls, the nights spent listening to breathing in the dark. Each memory rises gently, without fear attached to it. There is a quiet pride that settles in, not loud, not boastful, just a steady awareness that you adapted. You did not conquer winter, you learned how to live inside it. That distinction matters. Frontier writings often describe this moment with restraint. People did not celebrate survival openly. They acknowledged it through routine, through continuing on. You feel that now. The work continues. The nights pass. Life resumes its rhythm. You listen to the sounds around you one last time with winter's ear. Fire, wind, walls, breathing, animals beyond the shelter. Each sound once carried meaning, warning, instruction. Now they blend into a familiar backdrop. You recognize them without effort. Children sleep deeply nearby. Their bodies no longer tense against the cold. Their breathing is slow and even. You watch this briefly, then look away, content. They will remember little of this winter, but it will shape them quietly all the same. Outside, the land prepares for its own turning. Snow settles, ice loosens. The prairie holds its breath between seasons. You feel that pause inside yourself too. You think of what winter taught you. That warmth is built, not assumed. That rest must be protected. That survival is collective. None of these lessons feel dramatic now. They feel obvious, earned through repetition rather than revelation. There is still a long night ahead, but it does not concern you. You know what to do. You know how to respond. Confidence replaces vigilance. Sleep deepens, richer than it has been in months. When you wake briefly, it is not to check the fire or adjust a blanket. It is simply to turn, to breathe, to rest again. Morning will come, as it always does. The fire will be rebuilt. The day will ask for work, but something has shifted permanently. You trust your ability to endure. As dawn approaches, light filters in softly. You wake without tension. You sit, stretch, and feel warmth return easily. The cold still exists, but it no longer defines your nights. You step outside and breathe deeply. The air feels different now, less sharp, more forgiving. The land remains vast, but it no longer feels hostile. You return inside and tend the fire one more time. The motion feels familiar, almost ceremonial. Winter shaped this ritual, and you carry it forward even as the season fades. As night comes again, you lie down with ease. You do not brace yourself. You rest. And as sleep takes you, gently and without resistance, the long season finally loosens its hold. The hardest nights are behind you now. Their lessons remain, quiet and steady, carried into whatever comes next. Now everything slows. The fire settles into a soft glow, no longer urgent, no longer demanding. Your breathing matches it, deep and even. The walls hold without complaint. The cold waits politely at the edges, no longer pressing inward. You let the weight of the blankets sink over you. Muscles loosen. Thoughts stretch and drift. There is nothing left to solve tonight. Nothing left to guard against. The land outside is quiet. Inside, warmth lingers just long enough. You are safe. You are still. Let your eyes rest. Let the night carry you gently. The work is done. The cold has taught what it needed to teach. Sleep comes softly now, without effort. Sweet dreams.